I'm not entirely certain, Your Majesty. After a brief hesitation, Zephyrus refrained from making any rash statements. Standing before the great ruler of the land of eternal night, I cannot be sure she did not notice me. However, it seems Mother Night paid no heed to my presence. In truth, the god of the west wind suspected that Lady Night had detected him the moment he arrived. Yet, she simply did not care. To the chaotic gods, the twin gods of the dark night were ever present. Aside from rare exceptions, they scarcely acknowledged even their own offspring. Given this, Zephyrus found it entirely reasonable that Nyx had ignored him. As for Laine, Zephyrus was equally confident that he had gone unnoticed. In some mythologies, simple physical transformations were easily seen through. But the deities of chaos did not possess such abilities. Evading detection through transformation, whether into an animal or an inanimate object, was a trick often employed by later Olympian gods, and it had yet to fail. As for the Lord of the Spirit Realm, Zephyrus continued, I have wandered the underworld for centuries. If he had discovered me, he would have cast me out immediately. Since he did not, it is safe to assume he remained unaware of my presence. In matters of concealment, Zephyrus was supremely confident. He was not among the gods when it came to battle prowess, but in the art of remaining unseen, even the principal deities of the great divine families would struggle to detect him. I see. The divine king drummed his fingers lightly against the tabletop, lost in thought. His rhythmic tapping filled the chamber, reflecting his indecision. Zephyrus, he said at last, continued to watch the border of the land of eternal night. Should anyone emerge, or should the other deities show unusual activity, inform me at once. Zephyrus stiffened. Being sent into the underworld had been one thing. He had faith in his ability to remain hidden. But to be stationed at the very edge of the land of eternal night? If Lady Night deemed his presence a provocation, he might not escape unscathed. Your Majesty, understand the risks, Cronus interrupted, but I am merely asking you to observe. If Lady Nyx takes notice of you, you may retreat immediately. Do this task well, and I will acknowledge you as the leader of the wind gods, in the name of the divine king. Zephyrus's hesitation deepened. The four wind gods did not govern all aspects of the wind, and by his own estimation, his growth had reached its limit within the lower ranks of divine power. But if he gained the divine king's recognition, if he secured the position of leader of the wind gods, he could expand his dominion. He might even ascend to the realm of intermediate divine power. His face twisted with indecision, but ambition soon won out. As you command, Your Majesty. Zephyrus transformed into a swift breeze and departed. Cronus watched him go, deep in contemplation. So, you've made your decision, a voice said suddenly, breaking the silence of the palace. Rhea emerged from the passage of time, gazing at him with knowing eyes. Yes, Cronus sighed. It is time. His gaze turned toward a distant corner of the Mount of the Gods. He had orchestrated the union of Perse and Asteria himself. Without his intervention, it would have taken centuries for them to come together. But perhaps he had been too forceful. Perse, the third son of Crius, was a god of material destruction. Though his divine path required slow accumulation, it promised immense power. He had little patience for the goddess of Luminous, who barely reached weak divine power. Without the pressure of the divine king and his father, he would never have accepted such a match. Are you confident? Cronus asked, turning his focus back to Rhea. With Crius and me together, and with your sickle in hand, Hyperion will not be able to stand against us, Rhea replied. But that assumes the celestial god couple remains on our side. The godhood of the sun far surpassed meteorology or passage of time in direct combat. If Hyperion stood alone, Rhea was certain of victory. But if light and sun joined forces, the battle would be prolonged. Ceus is indifferent to the starry sky, Rhea mused. But Phoebe? She has always envied Thea. She shook her head. With the mother of light and the god of the sun standing beside her, who would even notice a goddess of Luminous? Cronus did not seem concerned. And the sea, he asked. Stable, as always, Rhea replied. Since Nereus and Doris united, the ocean deities have not openly opposed the ancient sea god. Cronus sneered. That peace is an illusion. The moment I make my move, it will crumble. He knew his reign had tightened over the past centuries, and the ocean gods were wary. But they would not act until provoked. The moment the starry sky erupts into conflict, they will lower their guard. So long as I do not act directly, they will not unite against me. Cronus stood. Come, let us meet Crius. The sky is vast, and even with an advantage, victory will take centuries to solidify. Rhea hesitated before following him. Just before stepping out, she spoke again. Cronus, I have already felt the innate urge of the heavenly empress's authority. He stopped. His expression remained unchanged, but a shadow of unease flickered in his gaze. As the world remained incomplete, chaos urged the birth of more deities. The divine king was expected to lead by example. But procreation, at this moment, meant walking a path toward his own downfall. I know, Rhea. I feel it too, Cronus said, taking a deep breath. But we must wait a little longer. He met her gaze. Let us first secure the starry sky and bring the ocean under my rule. Only then can I face what is to come. Yet even as he spoke, he knew the truth. Even if he conquered the seas, even if he ruled uncontested, he would still never match the power of his father. The throne of the atop Mount Otherworld, another 8 years had passed. When everything was prepared, at the divine king's command, the first true divine war erupted across chaos. Ostensibly, it was a conflict between the god of meteorology and the god of the sun over the allegiance of the god of stars. However, Cronus merely observed from atop the Mount of the Gods, manipulating the war from afar. Apart from the family of the god of sun, no other deities came to Hyperion's aid. Even the 2 sea gods remained silent spectators. Unlike the previous brief divine war that lasted only 7 days, battles between deities of intermediate divine power and above were arduous. Unless there was an overwhelming difference in strength, such conflicts would persist for centuries before a decisive outcome emerged. With the Mother of Light occupied by the celestial deities, the battle against the Queen of Gods and the god of meteorology dragged on. The god of sun's power was immense, and even with Cronus gifting Rhea the sickle that had once wounded the Heavenly Father, it took them years to force Hyperion into temporary retreat. This high-grade artifact was most effective against the sky, somewhat damaging to the divine king, but completely ineffective against the earth. Against the god of sun, it compensated for Rhea's combat weaknesses, but only to a limited degree. As the war waged on, the disparity in true god numbers became evident. While Hyperion's side had only a few true gods, Rhea was supported by the 3 ash tree goddesses, the 3 remaining wind gods, the growing Atlas, the heaven divider, and Crius's younger sons who had only recently emerged. Over the first 2 centuries, Hyperion's strength held the battle at a stalemate. But as the younger deities grew in power, the balance steadily tipped in favor of the divine king. Despite the vastness of the starry sky and battles occurring only every few years, it would take millennia to fully secure the star domains. However, the eventual outcome of the war became increasingly clear. One by one, star domains changed hands, and the god of stars, whose essence resided in them, gradually shifted allegiance. If no major changes occurred, Hyperion's defeat was inevitable. Meanwhile, at sea, tensions between the 2 sea gods escalated. 2 centuries into the celestial conflict, the tenuous peace between them ended. Although Thalassa, the gentle sea god, had several daughters in succession, it did little to delay the inevitable war. Unlike in the starry sky, the ocean deity sovereign held an absolute advantage from the outset. Even with assistance from the mountain gods, Pontus suffered 3 decisive defeats in 3 battles. Vast expanses of unclaimed sea fell under the ocean deity sovereign's control. If he successfully assimilated these waters into his godhood over the next few millennia, they would propel him toward the pinnacle of great divine power. However, sea and earth gods were masters of endurance, and their battles often lasted decades. While Mother Earth refrained from direct intervention, she lent out the life vase, ensuring that the war could not be swiftly concluded. For centuries, the clash of divine power ravaged land, sky, and sea. Countless creatures perished in the collateral destruction. Scattered humans, unable to comprehend the divine conflicts, assumed the gods were angry and worshipped them with greater devotion. Yet few deities had time to acknowledge them. When beings perished, their souls drifted toward the underworld, drawn by an invisible force back to the embrace of the spirit realm. After 700 years, the first deity transformed by the spirit realm finally emerged. In the depths of the land of eternal night, within a modest two-story wooden house, Laine brewed black tea as he observed the final transformation of the god of sleep embryo. However, referring to it as an embryo no longer felt accurate. The once small, somnus blossom had expanded 1,000,000-fold, its immense petals adorned with mysterious dark gold patterns. A faint fragrance drifted from its core, inducing drowsiness in those who inhaled it. Shadowy figures flickered around the great flower, seeming to share an eerie connection with it. How much longer? 2 more days. Laine sipped his tea, surprised at the prolonged transformation. Initially, he had expected the divine embryo to evolve into an ancient evil being akin to the sun swallower or the indeterminate mist. However, the outcome had deviated from his expectations. Although the embryo absorbed a small amount of chaotic source force, its origins in legitimate divine cultivation caused it to ultimately reject chaos. As a result, it remained an orderly existence, destined to descend as a deity rather than an ancient evil being. Transformed by your spirit realm, its aura has become peculiar. Nyx frowned slightly, unable to pinpoint the exact nature of the anomaly. The presence before her was distinct from the chaotic gods, yet it bore a resemblance to Tartarus's aura. The similarity was faint but undeniable. It is indeed unusual. Laine nodded, sensing the anomaly even more clearly. It exuded an innate malevolence. I initially assumed it would become an ancient evil being and even prepared a name for it, Eternal Night's Dream. However, it now seems more appropriate to call it an evil god. Rather than fusing directly with source power, it had taken form as a true god. While direct source power fusion could grant overwhelming strength, what defined a true god was their ability to wield power with awareness and intent. There remain countless mysteries about godhood, Laine admitted. Even as Lord of the Spirit Realm, I can grasp how divine existence functions, but not why. If he wielded great divine power, he might uncover the deeper truths of divinity. For now, he could only advance through cautious experimentation. Even with my primordial existence, I understand little of a god's essence, Nyx remarked. You shouldn't dwell on it too much. She spoke without much hope. Not even the most ancient beings had unraveled the mystery of divine immortality. It's beginning. Half a day later, in the midst of idle conversation, the final moment of the evil god's birth arrived. The enormous petals folded inward, concealing a powerful transformation. Unlike the typical grand spectacle of divine birth, the influence of the spirit realm ensured that the event remained unnoticed beyond the land of eternal night. The power of the night god swirled in the air, manifesting as falling petals under the starlight, a unique, eerie beauty. Laine sensed a growing clarity in the consciousness within the divine embryo. As a being nurtured by both the land of eternal night and the spirit realm, it was born with immediate awareness, akin to the 12 titans of old. Then, at a precise moment, an invisible surge of power washed over the world, plunging all living things into slumber. As the petals peeled away, a young deity emerged, squatting with his arms wrapped around his knees at the heart of the great flower. His pupils and hair were black, while his wings bore a pale gray hue. Divine power wove a cloth around him, fashioned in the unique style of the chaos world. This was Hypnos, the god of sleep, but unlike the gentle deity of later myths, Laine, as lord of the spirit realm, could sense the true nature of the being before him. Beneath his serene exterior lay a profound indifference. To him, all things beyond himself were illusions.
Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
The newly born deity opened his eyes, and the first thing he saw the world was the boundless night, as well as two ancient gods who felt even more present than the night sky itself. One was the master of this place, with the entire domain resonating with her. The other was still fused with the power of the spirit realm, with 7 layers of phantoms presenting themselves to his divine sight. In the perception of the god of sleep, 2 vast auras stretched from heaven to earth, capable of grinding him to dust with a mere lift of their hands. Subconsciously feeling a bit tense, Hypnos couldn't help but clench the deep purple flute in his hand. It was his natal divine artifact, a fusion of parts of sleep and dreamscape, along with a slight touch of chaos and music from the spirit realm. The lullabies played on it could put gods into slumber and allow creatures to lose their minds in their dreams, amusing the gods with their skirmishes. Hypnos pays his respects to the father god and mother goddess. His wariness was but a momentary flicker, so fleeting that even if Laine had not been observing closely, he would not have noticed. In the next moment, the newly born god displayed a gaze full of humility and admiration. As a born knower, Hypnos knew that the 2 divine beings before him were his parents. Since they had created him, they naturally did not intend to harm him. Moreover, in the presence of these 2 formidable entities, the god of sleep didn't feel that his caution held any significance. Rather than displaying his fangs, it was better to appear gentle and harmless. Father God, according to the traditions of chaos, it seems to be the case. Observing the change in Hypnos's demeanor, Laine was at first startled and then chuckled. For deities, power had a much deeper connection than blood ties. Laine and Nyx's powers jointly created this deity, so from a legal standpoint, they indeed could be regarded as his parents. But one need only reference Uranus and Gaia to understand how unreliable such non-blooded parental relationships could be. Furthermore, this was the chaos world, where in later mythologies, parent-child strife was practically daily fare for gods and mortals alike. Meanwhile, Nyx's expression was hard to discern behind her black veil. She paid no heed to Hypnos's greeting, simply turning to glance at Laine before opening her mouth calmly. Since the matter is resolved, you can take him away. Regarding the matter of compensation, in the end, Nyx had put faith in Laine's previous explanation. She also felt that no one could spy on her fate without her knowing. Given that it wasn't Laine's intention, she naturally should offer a reciprocal gift. Yet in the empty land of eternal night, there was nothing fit to be offered as such a gift. Thus, Nyx extended her hand and tore a piece from the hem of her dress. With a gentle shake, the tattered fabric transformed into a black silk cloth. The cloth was just an appearance. In reality, she had torn off a small portion of her Nyx's black robe. To the Lady of the Night, after all, this artifact could not advance any further, so this small loss of power was of little consequence. It is yours now. With a snort, she tossed the black cloth to Laine and, turning, merged silently into the night of the land of eternal night. Watching this, Laine couldn't help but smile wryly. Ha! Hypnos, it seems your mother goddess isn't too fond of you. Taking the black cloth imbued with the power of secrecy, Laine turned to look at the newborn deity. However, as soon as he spoke, he clearly felt a slight rejection from the surrounding night. Faced with Nyx's subtle warning, Laine said no more. So, Father God, will I be living with you from now on? Looking somewhat saddened by the departure of the mother goddess, Hypnos cast a hopeful gaze at Laine. Watching this scene, Laine felt not the slightest bit of compassion. He was well aware that an evil god, whose creation had been tinged with a portion of chaotic source force, was no paragon of virtue. For Hypnos, if it weren't for the difference in their strengths, as well as Laine's control over his godhood as the lord of the spirit realm, he probably wouldn't care at all about this so-called father god. But Laine didn't care about that either. Come with me, and the same goes for you all. Signaling Hypnos and the 3,000 demigod dreamscape evil spirits born alongside him to follow, Laine turned and started down the path they had come. At it novel Benedette. The god of sleep quickly followed. Despite having just been born, he vaguely sensed that in this realm blanketed by night, wandering aimlessly without someone to guide him would likely not bode well for him. Following the path from before, Laine continued on his way. Perhaps it was because the Lady of the Night had once permitted the power of the spirit realm to probe into the land of eternal night. But now, the return path seemed to genuinely possess some mystic force. The night's curtain subtly gave way, and the local beings dared not cause trouble there. Even without the Lady of the Night's guidance, Laine managed to exit successfully. Not until he had crossed the divide between the curtain of night and the underworld did he look back at the path he had traveled. Through divine vision, a faint halo lingered over the path, but became erratic as Laine left. This was a slight manifestation of chaos in the land of eternal night. Spaces within could possibly intersect and change. But no matter how it altered, the path tainted by the force of the spirit realm would remain, though its location might shift. If someone is fortunate enough to receive guidance in the future, they would be able to traverse the path Laine had once walked, entering and exiting the land of eternal night safely under the protection of the spirit realm's power. Of course, all this is predicated on the Lady of the Night being uninterested in him. The residual presence of the spirit realm may ward off the beings beneath the curtain of night, but it could not resist the primordial god herself. Hypnos, Laine turned and casually asked, "Do you see that fellow over there?" "Yes, Father God." The youthful deity bowed slightly and gazed into the distance. Above the Styx River, though seemingly empty, Hypnos sensed a surge of intense emotion circling there, blatantly revealing its existence to the outside world. The deities of the present, or rather the gods of chaos, always operated in this manner. They tended to sense and conceal through divine power and form, but they were utterly unguarded against the spiritual. Even a mighty Zeus could be sent into a dreamscape by the original god of sleep in mythology without noticing. To the deities of the spirit realm who observed directly from the spiritual layer, the god of west wind's concealment was as good as non-existence. "Father God, should I take care of him?" Wearing a gentle smile, Hypnos softly inquired. "Go ahead, capture him." Nodding, Laine agreed to Hypnos's request. Similar to the 12 Titans, Hypnos did not reach the limit allowed by his godhood upon birth, but he still possessed mid-level weak divine power. In direct combat, he might not be a match for the wind god, but seeing Zephyrus still completely oblivious, Laine knew that the battle would soon be over. Before Laine stepped out of the land of eternal night, the concentration of the god of West Wind's spirit was unprecedented. Ripples spread through the stillness of the land of eternal night that had lasted for hundreds of years, a sign that someone emerged from within. But no one knew who it might be. Perhaps a woman in a black dress, or just a nymph fairy. Under the tense watch of Zephyrus, a ripple flashed by, and Laine and Hypnos emerged one after the other. The disturbance of the night began to subside, and after waiting a while longer, ensuring that no third person was coming, the god of West Wind finally breathed a sigh of relief. Just now, he had been considering, had he been caught by the Lady of Night, how long he would insist before giving up the existence of the Divine King. In fact, this thought had crossed his mind many times over the past few hundred years. Fortunately, reality never granted him the opportunity to make that choice. The Lord of the Spirit Realm has returned, so I can also report back to the Divine King first. But that deity by his side, why have I never seen him before? While somewhat puzzled, Zephyrus quickly thought of the goddess of the nether moon, whose origin was unknown, and the weaver of stars who had appeared in the stellar sky. No matter the stranger's origin, all he needed to do was wait for Laine to return to the spirit realm, then report to the Divine King. The position of leader of the wind gods seemed within reach, and Zephyrus was getting impatient. What's that sound? Suddenly, the god of west wind felt his spirit become fuzzy. In the haze, he seemed to see a gray feather falling from the void. He should have been vigilant, but at some point his thoughts had slowed. A pleasant melody rose to his ears, and Zephyrus's eyes gradually closed. The intangible wind returned to its original form as the god of west wind collapsed to the ground. In a face-to-face encounter, this true god with weak divine power silently lost his resistance. By Laine's side, Hypnos put his flute away. Just then, the melodious lullaby had been played slowly, and the power of sleep spread in all directions with the sound. The sun god Apollo of later generations also possessed a lyre, with which he could play tunes capable of bewitching deities. But in the hands of the true god of sleep, compared to the lyre Hermes gave to Apollo, his flute was undoubtedly more potent. Accompanied by the melodious tune, Hypnos gently shook his wings. On his pale gray wings, feathers of illusion silently fell and merged into the void. The music was sleep, the feathers were dreams. With no forewarning, Zephyrus in the sky only felt a wave of drowsiness before losing consciousness in relaxation. If his spirit had been on edge, ever vigilant, the power of the god of sleep would have been greatly diminished. But clearly, the god of west wind never suspected that he would be discovered, nor had he understood the power of sleep and dreams. Thus, without any resistance, he was easily subdued by Hypnos. Father God, how do you plan to punish him? Flying into the sky, seizing Zephyrus, who turned back to his true form in dreams, Hypnos asked respectfully. Like him, the wind god also had a pair of wings on his back, though they seemed somewhat short. In Chaos World, gods with wings were rare but still numerous, and they were also considered part of the mainstream deities. God of West Wind, had it novel been at. Looking at the unconscious Zephyrus before him, Laine felt hesitant. He had intended to take him to the spirit realm and seal the immortal deity, but then he dismissed the idea. To seal a true god required a constant consumption of power to counteract the divine power he obtained from his godhood. Although this was nothing for the spirit realm, it was also meaningless. As long as a deity could not be killed, Laine believed that any purely physical punishment was insignificant. Some gods have the god of punishment hold up the sky for eternity. Some make him push a massive rock in eternal recurrence without end. Having made his decision, Laine reached out and gently touched Zephyrus's forehead. Since you like to prize so much, as a punishment, you will become the most clumsy of voyeurs. The authority flashed, and the wisdom of the god of the west wind was lacking a corner out of nowhere. Although he could still think, any idea that originated from him would have flaws. At the same time, an indeterminate fate silently enveloped Zephyrus. In the obscurity, a subtle change had taken place. From that moment on, whenever the god of the west wind tried to hide, he would inevitably reveal a flaw due to inadequate consideration. And even if the flaw went unnoticed, all his actions would lead to an unknown outcome under the dictates of fate. If the original outcome was bad, it would not change. If the original outcome was good, it would start all over again. To the side, the observing Hypnos retracted his wings, silently watching this scene. His expression remained respectful, but inwardly, he felt a chill. For an evil god with inherently diluted emotions, physical punishments did not concern him. Compared to that, these methods affecting wisdom and fate were far more intimidating. Let's go. Leaving Zephyrus on the ground, Laine paid no further attention. He swiped through the air in front of him. A silvery gate of light emerged, and he stepped in, with Hypnos hurrying after him. The gods had always thought the Nethermoon was the entrance to the spirit realm, which is why the divine king sent the wind gods to watch over the underworld, but in fact, at most, the Nethermoon could be considered the front door. Throughout the entire Chaos World, any place covered by the spirit realm could be used to directly enter or exit the realm. But since Laine had never opened access to and from the spirit realm in the current world, no god had ever discovered this. Within a few steps, Laine had passed through 3 layers of spatial barriers. Mount Sinai was not far away, but on the 3rd layer of the spirit realm, Laine halted. Up until a few hundred years ago, everything beyond the 3rd layer of the spirit realm was devoid of concrete things. Space-time was in such disarray that life had no foundation to exist, with only the spirit realm's angels passing by occasionally. But at this moment, where Laine stood was different. On the surface, they seemed to be standing in the sky next to a small hillock. Seeing Laine stop, Hypnos also halted. He looked around the environment. The space here was quite narrow, totaling less than 100 miles in range. A few humans were living in the distance, while on the hillock, a holy figure radiating light was talking to a mortal on the ground. This is the 3rd layer of the spirit realm, where you will make your new home. Slowly revealing his arrangements, Laine did not intend to take Hypnos to his divine palace. In fact, had it not been for Nyx's visit, Laine himself would have had to cultivate a true god to oversee dreams. But now that there was one ready-made, he set aside his original plans. Now that Hypnos had come into being, it was time for him to start working. Although he had only been in existence for 1 day, he was, after all, a deity, and Laine thought he wouldn't mind. Please command me, and I will do my utmost to fulfill your request. From their brief encounter, the newly born Hypnos had realized that pretending to be a docile and obedient person was of little use, so he decisively changed his attitude. Do you see where this place is? Looking around, Hypnos observed the surrounding environment intently. The first thing he noticed was the figure radiating light. He easily identified the other's identity, a territorial god birthed from the mountain. What surprised him, though, was that he couldn't make out the god's face no matter how hard he tried. This must also be a dream, Hypnos said with certainty after a moment of concentration. A real dream that has been separated from its master. This was a dream, but it was more than that. Normal dreams are built upon the spirituality of living beings, and when the host awakes, the dreams shatter along with them. But Hypnos could tell that this dream had become disconnected from its master. As the power of the spirit realm merged with it, it gradually became more real. Even if its master awoke, it could continue to exist. Yes, this is a sort of real dream. Nodding, Laine said with a smile. This is a human's dream. He is receiving a deity's reward, his greatest wish. Because the world he has traveled is only so vast, the size of this dream fragment has been fixed. In his eyes, deities are supreme. Thus, the gods in the dream have no real faces. Like this one, there are many dreams here. What I want you to do is smelt these dreams, reshape them, and then piece them together. With a wave of his hand, the scenery before them instantly shrank. In a flash, the dream fragments in 100 miles radius turned into a transparent bubble. Around the 2 of them, countless bubbles were born and disappeared in rotation. These were the dreams of intelligent life on the Earth spanning hundreds of years. Some featured humans as their protagonists. Many more were of beasts, and Hypnos even spotted a few territorial gods among them. They were stacked together, reflecting off the power of the spirit realm. The stronger the master of the dream, the more powerful the corresponding fragment. Hypnos could even sense signs of life in the dreams of some deities, vague though they were. That was a new life, similar to the 3,000 evil spirits of his dreams, yet entirely different. Real dreams are the best material for bridging order and chaos. Turning to face the god of sleep beside him, Laine granted him partial access to the 3rd layer of the spirit realm. The space-time of the spirit realm gets more chaotic the deeper one goes. But at the same time, the deeper one goes, the broader the laws appear. To powerful spiritual bodies, the shallower layers of the spirit realm can feel oppressive, and they're not conducive to their further growth. Over the years, the spirit realm's self-generated life forms and the souls of beings who died in external divine wars have mostly accumulated in the first and second layers, some even developing primitive social structures. Many of them have grown strong, gradually mastering extraordinary powers. Thus, Laine has been contemplating what kind of material could stably exist in the chaotic space-time and give the shallow spiritual bodies a chance to adapt to the change from order to chaos. Undoubtedly, dreams were the ultimate answer he chose. Your meaning is, you want me to turn the dreams into the cornerstone of this layer's interface. And even after their main body takes shape, to have the ability to automatically absorb dreams and integrate them into itself. Feeling the interface permissions opening to him, Hypnos inquired. Yes, Laine nodded. Dreams are based on reality, yet they transcend it. They inherently symbolize the process of transformation from order to chaos. Let the dreams close to the current world become part of the layer near the second level of the spirit realm. The exceedingly bizarre dreams can be constructed in areas near the fourth layer of the spirit realm. Even some powerful beings' dreams possess their own strength, and once they are built into part of the spirit realm, under the influence of the spiritual aura, they might even give birth to some special creatures of the spirit realm. As he spoke, Laine's thoughts drifted. For a moment, he was reminded of some dark fairy tales he had read in a past life. Serious fairy tales could never exist. After all, in dreams, people's behavioral logic is closer to doing whatever they desire. Add to that the inherently chaotic space-time of the spirit realm. Laine didn't believe this place could naturally give rise to any benevolent spirits. I will follow your command, Father God. Bowing slightly, Hypnos softly expressed his obedience. Even though the realms below the fifth layer of the spirit realm seemed somewhat confining to an existence of a true god like him, he harbored no intention of refusal. Hypnos was not a being like Iclip. He knew how to contain his power and overcome his instincts. Moreover, he didn't feel, not even slightly, that Laine was asking for his opinion. Very well, go and do it then. Liana, nodding his head, Laine summoned the goddess of the nether moon. I am here, your highness. As always, her black attire transformed from ethereal to tangible, and Liana quickly responded to Laine's call. He's a new god I have created, Hypnos. For the coming period, he will be responsible for constructing the third layer of the spirit realm. She is Liana, my assistant. In my absence, any matters can be referred to her. 3 crescent moons hung in the sky, and today it just so happened that the nether moon was illuminating the outer world. After introducing them to each other and observing the goddess of the nether moon, who had managed the spirit realm diligently for the past centuries, Laine also felt a bit sentimental. Even when he was in the spirit realm, he was often busy with the operation of the laws and assimilating source power. In actuality, the affairs of the spirit realm had always been managed by Liana. The majority of the beings in the spirit realm had never even seen Laine. Just as they referred to him, great ancient spirit will. In their eyes, Laine's existence was but a legend, with Liana being the true ruler of the spirit realm. Liana, yes, Adat Novel Benedat. The goddess in the black dress looked up, meeting Laine's gaze. In his hands, part of the element of origin that the spirit realm had absorbed over the millennia was converging, intertwining with spirituality to form a multifaceted crystal. The power of elements is quite special. It seems not to have a true higher godhood. Like the earth element, it is influenced by godhoods such as the earth, mountain, celestial body, magic power, witchcraft, etc., yet it doesn't fully belong to any of them. Interestingly enough, while in chaos, darkness is stronger than light, life far surpasses death, and earth, water, wind, fire are not equal. The powers of the elements do not follow this pattern. They maintain a dynamic balance, appearing to be completely unaffected by the varying strengths of authority. And magic power is even more peculiar. It is the result of intelligent life refining elements through the spirit, and its power is not constant. The purer the spirit of the being refining it, the more powerful the magic power becomes. This power originally belonged to the owner of the Nether Moon, but now it will belong to the new master of the Nether Moon. Liana, this is magic power, Laine said with a smile. It will become your moonlight. Strictly speaking, although Liana was called the goddess of the Nether Moon before, what she actually governed was only the concept of the Nether Moon, because at that time, the Nether Moon did not truly exist. It was a projection of the spirit realm into the underworld, and its moonlight was actually the rotation of the 7 crescent moons of the spirit realm shining down. But from now on, the Nether Moon will have its own unique moonlight. To serve you is the purpose of my existence. As the new multifaceted crystal merged into her body, Liana's presence became much more substantial. Her divine power remained unchanged, but the upper limit was raised yet again. Without surprise, as the underworld expands further, the threshold of potent divine power will open up to her. Even considering the unique nature of the Nether Moon within the underworld, Liana may step into the realm of great divine power quite soon. Meanwhile, the originally serene light of the underworld began to change. The silvery brightness turned into dark purple hues, dispersing invisible forces. Under such light, some of the corpses that had been brought to the underworld and died for various reasons shuddered imperceptibly. Gradually, it seemed as if new souls emerged within them, burning in the form of flames. Soulfire, that was their name. When the fire extinguished, it also signified the end of the Wraith's rebirth. Fire is the first of the elemental domains under spirituality. Thus, the newly born consciousness of the undead can also persist within the soulfire. Although the undead have spirit in their name, most of them are not spiritual bodies and are essentially still existences in the material realm. The only difference is that, while the bodies of normal lives are alive, theirs are dead. But from another perspective, perhaps in the eyes of the Wraiths, it is the bodies of the living on earth that are dead and theirs that are alive. At Novel Benedet, as time passed, the number of Wraiths gradually increased. Not only the corpses of life forms, but also places dense with negative energy brought forth life under the Nether Moon's illumination. A few enlightened beings bathed in the moonlight, regarding the Nether Moon as the source of life. The Wraiths call it the primitive moon, because in their blurry memories, there was a moon on Earth too, but it came later than the one in the underworld. Moreover, most importantly, only the primitive moon can reverse life and death and grant them rebirth. The nascent worship of celestial bodies began to spread, with the meager power of faith flowing toward the Nether Moon. Laine was aware of the changes in the outside world, but like the humans before the Third Era, it was not yet the time for these mundane entities to enter the scene. Furthermore, even though the existence of a spirit realm had deprived the underworld of the ownership of souls, this place near the source power of the darkness, of chaos, naturally became the homeland of the Wraiths. Previously, because the moonlight of the Nether Moon lacked strength, they couldn't truly come to life. But now, with the involvement of magic power, the spirit can easily influence matter, and hence the undead were born. However, while Laine was organizing the affairs of the spirit realm accumulated over 700 years, in a place unknown to him, a clandestine meeting was taking place in a lightless domain. In the past, relying on his prescience of mythological trajectories, everything seemed to be within Laine's expectations. He was like a player standing outside the world, lightly touching the threads of fate, making the gods dance like puppets. But as the spirit realm grew stronger, the interference of destined forces by the indeterminate destiny became more and more significant, and not even he knew how many paths of fate had already changed. He saw some of them, such as changes in the starry sky, such as the changes in the Divine King. But in Laine's eyes, these were all within his expectations. Yet obviously, some things that were beyond his anticipation had been set into motion the day the spirit realm was opened. Not all gods will act as he expects. Some do so out of simple emotion, others hunger for something further. The realm of lightness, true to its name, is a place where everything is nothing. If one does not possess sufficient strength, even mere existence cannot be maintained here, for pure darkness will devour all. Yet to the two conversing at this moment, the peril of the realm of lightness is nothing more than a joke. Gaia, you see it, don't you? At the edge of the domain, beside the green-clad figure, a calm and magnetic male voice slowly came. If one were to only hear the voice, perhaps everyone would think it belonged to a scholarly man with a belly full of poetry and literature. Yes, Erebus, he has created another god, and he has even snatched it from the hands of the world, Gaia said. The spirit realm. Through this interface, he can do many things beyond your imagination, Erebus replied. Watching the sudden change in the moonlight in the sky, the woman in the green dress did not hide her emotions. Or rather, she was never good at hiding them. She doesn't like Laine and never has. When the severely depleted life vase returned to her hands thousands of years ago, this dislike turned into fury. At first, Gaia wanted to retaliate. If she wished, the earth and the underworld would move accordingly, and all life bearing the aura of the spirit realm would be targeted by this current part of existence. And this was just the beginning. She wanted to imprison Laine deep within the earth, and after he surrendered the other half of the dominion over life, make him pay the price for his actions. However, Erebus persuaded her at that time. The Dark Overlord told Gaia that with the opening of the spirit realm, Laine could no longer be imprisoned. He was one with the spirit realm, or rather, he was the personification of the spirit realm, but he was not like the primordial gods, dissociated from his own essence. For Laine, even if his external divine body was destroyed, he could be reborn in the realm at any time. The part of the life vase that was lost was similarly integrated into the spirit realm, and had become nearly impossible to reclaim. Thus, Gaia's unvented rage shrouded the earth for 3 years. But she had not given up on revenge. Instead, she harbored her fury deep within her heart. When you urged me to stop back then, Erebus, but now you have called me here again, she said. If you have something in mind, just say it. You have what you want, but I only wish for him to know that the earth is not so easily deceived, she said. The voice was somewhat indifferent. Gaia knew Erebus was no kind-hearted individual. Most likely, he wanted her to do something that only she was capable of. But Gaia didn't care. In later times, she might support Zeus on behalf of the Titans, or she might turn against Zeus because of the Titans' imprisonment in the abyss. Throughout the process, she seemed to gain nothing and instead lost much of her power. But that was Mother Earth. She seldom cared about benefits and was more concerned with momentary emotions. As long as she could get her revenge, she was willing to pay some extra price. Don't talk like that, my dear sister. Maybe I simply wanted to help you. Erebus chuckled at Gaia's words, his mood seeming rather good today. But Mother Earth's expression remained icy cold. If he genuinely cared, he could have shown it when Uranus was still around. But he watched as she faced pain. This so-called concern was nothing but a joke. On the other side, seeing Gaia had no intention of responding, Erebus was unconcerned. As she had said, he approached her because, naturally, there was something he himself could not do. In the domain of life, although Mother Earth only harnessed the power of her accompanying divine artifact, she was beyond the reach of the Dark Overlord. You know, Gaia, thousands of years ago, right here on Earth, the gods created life. He began. With his right hand, he parted the darkness in front of him, and the lives in the underworld that were created that day emerged before the two ancient gods. Ironically, they had long since died, and what moved now were new lives born from the carcasses. They used your life vase to endow living beings with bodies, and Laine used the well water to grant them souls. Without surprise, the well that scattered the souls was crafted from the source power of life, a divine artifact molded from the same whole as the life vase. He continued. Yes, Gaia replied. I don't need you to remind me how he used what originally belonged to me to bestow souls before my very eyes. You misunderstand. I am not mocking you. In fact, I'm merely emphasizing that in the domain of life, the bodies and souls of beings do intersect. Erebus shook his head as he explained. But to Gaia, it sounded as if he was describing her failure in another way. So what have you discovered? Gaia was growing impatient, having never realized how unpleasant her brother's character was. "Don't rush, my sister," he said with a light chuckle, watching the wraiths wandering in the scene and speaking slowly. "I simply found some secrets about life through the bifurcated divine artifact. Do you know, Gaia, that all things need nourishment to grow? The world draws strength from its own cycles and the void, while the gods extract power from their corresponding symbols through godhood. One quality transforms into another. An equivalent exchange is the unchanging law of this world." "So what?" Gaia frowned as she listened to Erebus's words. "Of course, I know this. Even the plants that I create need to draw nutrients from the earth, and I don't need you to teach me that. What do all these things you're saying have to do with life and the soul?" With a faint smile, Erebus remained unhurried. Perhaps influenced by his godhood, the Dark Overlord quite enjoyed the sensation of revealing secrets bit by bit. "Is that so? Then tell me, my sister, plants draw their nutrient from the earth, but where do those lives created by the gods obtain the strength to maintain their existence from?" "Don't you see?" Gaia felt this was another pointless question. They eat plants, or they eat each other. They drink water to maintain the balance of elements in their bodies. What's wrong with that? "Of course that's wrong," Erebus said succinctly. "If life could not be divided, then I would also think that's normal. But since the body and the soul can exist independently, why can a life feed on the body of another life, yet soul does not feed on the soul of another life? Where does the soul get its nourishment if it doesn't have a feeding process?" Gaia fell silent as she began to vaguely understand what the other was trying to say. The nutrients for a body's growth are water and plants, but for a soul to grow, its nourishment is the body itself. It needs nothing else. Erebus's gaze grew profound. Nurtured by the body's warmth, it directly harnesses power from the intersection between the two in the field of life, directly drawing strength from the former. And as time passes, bodies develop, mature, age, and so do souls, but the latter cycle is much longer. So in the end, they will all return as one, becoming a part of that world. Do you know what this means? It means every soul is a seed, and the material world is the soil from which it germinates. When a life's body reaches its end, the fruit known as soul is ripe. Mother Earth spoke slowly, also somewhat shocked by the realization. Chaos draws power from the primordial chaos, transforming it into leaderless source power, thereby continuously perfecting the world. Meanwhile, the spirit realm takes the material world as chaos, drawing power from it, constantly perfecting itself. Indistinctly, Gaia seemed to see, at the end of time, the day when the spirit realm would stand shoulder to shoulder with the material world. From the perspective of chaos itself, it's hard to say whether this is good or bad, because the growth of spirituality in itself strengthens the effect of the world's inner cycle. But for the material world, oriented towards matter and order, this certainly isn't good news. Just as the world grows increasingly mighty, yet Mother Earth's power grows ever weaker. Gaia knew this all too well. No, that's not right. Suddenly Mother Earth realized something. Given the current state of these lives and their weak natures, even if their numbers were to increase 10 million times or more, even if they covered the Earth, that still wouldn't mean much to chaos. "Stop with your alarmist talk, Erebus. What exactly do you want me to do?" Raising an eyebrow, seeing his sister catching on, the Dark Overlord was a tad disappointed. When he first discovered this, he was genuinely shocked, but then he realized that drawing strength in this manner was like scooping water from the sea with a basin, and that, too, a sea constantly fed by rivers and streams. Unless the number of intelligent beings counts in the hundreds of millions, and unless their level of life can be raised not just by one tier, it would sound pleasant, but practically meaningless. The power derived from the world's self-sustaining operation in one day surpasses what the souls of those mundane objects could transform in 100 years. It's simple. Next time, he said, when this batch of life dies, the next time you create life, I want you to incorporate this into it. He stretched out his hand. and an undefined mass of dark gas wavered in Erebus's palm. At first, Gaia did not recognize it, but soon she sensed its essence. It was darkness. In terms of quantity, it was very weak, weaker even than the power of a territorial god, but it was also very pure, for it came directly from the body of the primordial gods. Darkness. Erebus, I don't mind being your tool this once, but I hope you can think of a more reasonable method. To combine it with the prime liquid in the life vase, I can do that. But to expose life directly to source power, madness would be their only outcome. With such an obvious change, do you think he would not notice? Disappointed, Gaia did not expect that her brother would come up with such a method. That's why I want you to dilute it as much as possible, Erebus said indifferently. Like a drop of divine power entering the ocean, there will be no problem as long as the amount is small enough. Of course, given its nature, it might distort the thinking of life, but it won't completely destroy their rationality. Just find a reason, like how you previously created humans with only positive emotions, and now you want to do the reverse, to create humans with more negative emotions. Do I need to teach you that? I understand, but can this help me deal with him? Mother Earth hesitantly nodded, yet she was somewhat puzzled. At. She could see that he was using this method to infiltrate his power into the spirit realm, but how could this pose any threat to Laine? This bit of power would not be taken seriously by any god with intermediate divine power or above, let alone Laine, who was in the spirit realm. In the external world, divine power would limit his strength. But in the spirit realm, the realm itself is his power. Don't you understand yet, my dear sister? Erebus said, a god does not die. So if you want to deal with him, you must first understand him, understand how to target his world. Erebus was somewhat at a loss for words. Although he did not understand what good merely venting would do, he still patiently persevered in order to gain Gaia's assistance. After all, he knew nothing about the domain of life. When my source power enters the spirit realm, I have no expectation of it returning, but after all, it's just an insignificant bit, and the souls of mortals can only carry so much. Laine harvests power through souls, so he will definitely return the souls to their origin. This must be done via the origin of the spirit realm, and this is my goal. I want part of me to come into contact with the root of the spirit realm. Erebus looked straight at his sister, and then I will know how the spirit realm was created. No one tells the truth to an unwelcome visitor who comes knocking at their door. Gaia, so I have never believed Laine's explanations. I don't want him to tell me anything. I want to see for myself. Of course, when it gets to that point, Laine will surely notice my actions. He will intercept that source power, but I'll get the chance to break free from chaos. And you can find out his weakness. Watching his sister gradually becoming moved, the Dark Overlord couldn't help but sneer in his heart. Weakness. First of all, it's uncertain whether a weakness truly exists in the world, and even if it does, Erebus would never reveal it. He himself also wanted to take that step, and if he succeeded in creating the world, he would be too busy concealing it to allow anyone else to discover its secrets. After all, Laine is a clever person. Even if she suffers a setback, she certainly wouldn't disclose it. He had even thought that if he could also create a world, although he would come into conflict with Laine over the yet unclaimed power, they might still form an alliance against the current world. Meanwhile, Gaia couldn't understand why, but upon hearing her brother's explanation, her first reaction wasn't admiration for his cunning strategy or the potential gains from success, but rather a feeling that both Laine and Erebus seemed somewhat out of place among the chaotic gods. In her memory, the gods would brawl if they were strong enough, or seek allies if they weren't, at most using some strategies to rally support or launch a surprise attack. Erebus's approach was indeed rare. I will do it, Mother Earth finally said. If Cronus does not wish to create a second generation of humanity, then I shall lead the endeavor. He disregards my will and refuses to release Oranides and Q-crops from the abyss. Then I will not concern myself with his thoughts. I will do as you ask, but whether the outcome will be as you hope, that's no longer my concern. Upon hearing this, Erebus nodded. He had finally persuaded Gaia. He couldn't guarantee that this attempt would definitely succeed, but it was the only method he could think of. Soon after, Gaia left with that power, while the Dark Overlord, after watching Mother Earth depart, stood at the edge of his domain, gazing out over the land of eternal night that enveloped the other half of the underworld. Compared to Gaia, he was actually more interested in joining forces with Nyx. If the power of secrecy could also be brought in, the plan would be infallible. But he was also aware that if one could say his sister truly had limited means, his younger sister was simply disinterested in such schemes. She did not harbor a strong desire to become more powerful. If possible, she could even be content living in seclusion for eternity. Breaking free from the control of chaos would be great if it were possible, but it wouldn't matter if it wasn't. As primordial gods, as long as they did not fully personify like Gaia, they would not completely fall from the domain of great divine power. Erebus understood this mindset because a long time ago, he had thought the same. If it weren't for the emergence of Laine, he might have also remained alone in the realm of lightness, watching the changes in the outside world until the end of time. I hope it will be successful, but if it fails, I can still accept it. As an Eternal, I have many more opportunities. With a slight shake of his head, for Erebus, the greatest cost of a failed mission would be to raise Laine's vigilance. But action always leads to consequences. In any case, the Dark Overlord was ready to face another enemy. Especially after that source power is triggered, whether or not he achieves the result he wants, he will regard Laine as his rival. But before that, he still had one more thing to do. Come! With a clear call, in the next moment, within his true body, Erebus truly mobilized the power of the great divine power. Under the power of the primordial gods, everything that took place today was devoured by darkness, turning into the essence of secrecy, curtailing even fate to a certain extent. Huff, a bit winded, even within his own body, wielding power of this caliber was no small burden. It wasn't the sheer power that exerted pressure on him, but rather the capability to a certain extent to interfere with fate, and that was the real challenge. I hope the gains will be worth my effort. Standing at the edge of the realm of lightness, Erebus began to anticipate the results of his scheming. Since Laine returned to the spirit realm, another 500 years had passed in a flash. During these 500 years, the situation in chaos has been ever-changing. The war in the sky was approaching its end, and although Cronus had slowed down his offensive due to Laine's return and the changes to the nether moon, after decades without further disturbances from the underworld, the warfare reignited. Now, over 70% of the stars had submitted to the Divine King, and the god of stars in those regions had also turned. The remaining areas, apart from those allocated to the domains of god of meteorology Ceus, were all that Hyperion had left. Only around the vicinity of the sun, where the god of sun's power was unprecedentedly strong, did the queen of gods and god of meteorology have to slow down their pace. Meanwhile, at sea, the sea gods experienced for the first time what the power of strategy could do. Battles between potent divine powers rarely had clear outcomes, but under Métis's leadership, the god of the ocean's lineage made rapid progress elsewhere. They avoided the battlefields of the principal gods and squeezed the territorial domains of the near-sea deities. Pontus's offspring were exhausted by the struggle, always one step behind. If not for the diminishing warfare in the stars, Pontus would likely have had difficulty maintaining even his last bastions in the masterless seas. Following this, Métis the Wise became a well-known name across the lands and seas. In keeping with the tradition of the god of the ocean's lineage, many deities visited her to express their affections, but the goddess of wisdom rejected them all. Compared to the other gods, she preferred to spend time with the golden humanity that survived the divine war. She taught them hydrology that she had created, enabling them to understand the ocean's currents and climate. Thus, the humans of the sea left traces vastly different from those on land. In such times, in the stars above, Ceus' second daughter, the god of stars Asteria, gave birth to a daughter with the god of material destruction Perse. And with the birth of this child, the relationship between Ceus and the divine king which had been relatively harmonious, suddenly developed a rift. Atop Mount Otherworld, within the palace of the Divine King, the gods were seated in a circle, the atmosphere tinged with oppression. The just-born infant lay on the long table at the center, with relatives from both sides present, save for the goddess of meteor and her sister. From his seat of honor, Cronus cast a glance over the deities assembled before him and could not help but curse his own luck internally. His throne's power would have surged within 100 years, at most 200 or 300, after Crius had secured his reign over the majority of the celestial space, and the god of stars had sorted out the energy tides brought about by the divine wars. But the problem had to arise precisely now, between the god of meteorology and his greatest supporter. Zeus had no interest in the strife for the stars, true to his godhood as a deity of lightless celestial bodies. He sought no brilliance, but Phoebe, his wife, thought otherwise. Persuaded by the deity of bright bodies, he joined the war in the name of the relationship between his second daughter and Crius's son, Perse. Though they did not exert their full strength and only confronted Thea, the goddess of light and sight, without truly clashing, it was this standoff that held the key to victory or defeat in the war. But all was coming to an end. If the current problem could not be resolved, even Phoebe would set aside her scheming and sever her ties with the lineage of the Divine King completely. Her name is Hecate, correct? Added Novel Benedette. Feeling the heavy atmosphere and her husband's mood, Rhea, the heavenly empress, spoke up to break the silence. She looks very cute. She will certainly be a beautiful goddess when she grows up. As the heavenly empress's words fell, no one took up the conversation. Cronus's heart sank gradually. He knew that even Crius might be regretting his actions at this moment. After all, the gods are immortal, and divine authority is eternal. But these were laughable concepts in the face of chaos. While no deity had been heard of as killed by the world, the sight of a new god tearing apart a godhood had been personally witnessed by many. Even now, Cronus himself couldn't help but feel a trace of apprehension toward the female infant before him. A deity without godhood. This was a first since chaos created the world. Even those called territorial gods with a divine power level of 0 by Laine at least had a river, a spring, a small celestial body, or a mountain mound as their domain. These objectively existing things might not be as eternally indestructible as natural rules, but they were sufficient to provide them with divine power to maintain the existence of their form. But this infant was different. Even as Divine King, Cronus could not sense any connection between her and anything else. A deity without a source of divine power meant that for every bit of power she used, she lost just as much. It would only take a bit of minor damage for her to potentially fall into an eternal slumber, much like the death of a mortal being. True gods did not concern themselves with territorial gods precisely because of this. Once their territory was destroyed and the remaining divine power exhausted, they might continue to live in concept, but it would be no different from death. And Hecate before them was even worse off, for apart from her immortal essence, she was no different from the humans upon the earth. Zeus, she may not have godhood, but I can attempt to give her one, Cronus said, with a vacillating tone, looking at the god of stars. While such godhood may only rely on the power of the Divine King, at least, it's not a matter of godhood. Your Majesty, it is a warning from the world. Perseus suddenly spoke up. The atmosphere in the room instantly solidified. Although everyone had been thinking it, no one had voiced it until Perseus disregarded all caution. As the god of material destruction and the father of Hecate, even though he was now weak, he had been expected to belong to a domain of great divine power. But by his father's and the Divine King's design, he was forced to unite with a goddess of meteor, who was only a level 2 in divine power. He did not know that in the original mythology, he would have been moved by her over a long period of time. However, perhaps due to rebellion under oppression, he had grown to loathe Asteria instead. Divine King, your Majesty, forgive my frankness, he said, seemingly respectful as he looked at Cronus, but his words were aimed to wound. Perhaps the world does not wish for a ruler who governs all. Just like the once heavenly Father, absolute power only brings pain. Thus, he sent this child to tell us that all of this was a mistake. Boom! An invisible pressure descended upon him. It was not the power of the divine king, but rather from his father-in-law. The typically reticent god of stars showed his power for the first time in front of the second-generation Titans, leaving Perseus' words stuck in his throat, unable to speak any further. Y0 you can read S0RT, T0 Uching, and R0 Mantic SD0 Rise of 0 UTC0 Upples, as well as children's SD0 Rise F0 are Free 0 and Side 0 Ris, that C0M. In chaos, aside from life and death, the forces of the dark are always stronger than those of the light. Even Cronus suddenly realized that his silent brother had surreptitiously reached this stage. Perseus, I know you have always disdained Asteria. Ceus' voice was not loud, but it was serious and powerful. Since you're so opposed to your oppressive wife, let's end it here. However, from today on, the starry sky will no longer welcome you. The pressure disappeared, and Perseus gasped for air. He looked at his father, but the god of meteorology remained silent. Not to mention his recent rants in front of the divine king. Even Crius himself was no match for Ceus. In terms of battle, meteorology also only relied on some of wind's power. Thunderbolts in later times would expand its domain, but from the day of its birth, it had its master. As one of the rare titans to be imprisoned in Tartarus, Crius' downfall was not without reason. All right, I misspoke just now, Prince Ceus and Divine King, but looking around and finding no support, Perseus wasn't surprised. He took a moment to compose himself and said indifferently, however, as the father of such a god of punishment, I am deeply unsettled. From now on, the matters of the divine court will have nothing to do with me. I intend to visit the underworld, or perhaps the sea. The god of destruction was fearless. After speaking, he turned and walked away, without a care for the expressions of the other deities behind him. Narrowing his eyes, with space itself seeming to stagnate around him, Cronus was somewhat enraged by the arrogance of the deity before him. But until the other left the temple, he made no additional moves. If it were another time, he would never have allowed such insolence. But at this moment, as the orchestrator of the relationship between the other and the goddess of meteor, he tolerated Perseus. The warning of the world, The divine king had been warned by the world, in this chaos world that had evolved at an accelerated pace because of Laine, which was a reward even Uranus hadn't had the chance to enjoy. At this moment, even Cronus himself couldn't help but ponder whether chaos truly did not want him meddling with the starry sky. So the world, devoid of subjective consciousness, used this unique god to caution him. Even as he looked at the infant girl before him, if it weren't for the fact that she didn't exhibit the special appearance of the Hecatonchires, Cronus wouldn't dare be certain whether she was truly a god or not. Cronus, although I'm sorry, I might have to retreat for a while. The god of meteorology spoke again amidst the stiff atmosphere. Upon hearing this, the divine king's expression changed slightly, and Phoebe at his side opened her mouth but eventually chose not to speak. She craved the limelight, indeed, but she knew that the fundamental reason for the divine king's regard for her was her husband. Now that he had made his decision, she wouldn't persist in her own views. Your Majesty, she thus spoke, as my husband said, we fear we might withdraw from this conflict. If you still wish to act against the sky, I advise you to make preparations early. Very well. After a moment of silence, Cronus took a deep breath and ultimately accepted this. After all, aiding Cronus in controlling the starry sky really held no apparent benefits for Ceus. Unwilling to risk inciting the wrath of the current laws of the world, it came as no surprise to the divine king. But remembering that even his brutal father had not experienced such events, Cronus felt some irritability in his heart. Along with it came discontent with the nature of the world itself. First, it chose a tyrant. After he assumed the throne, it only added to his troubles. Cronus couldn't understand what he, as the divine king, was lacking. He had never disrupted the order of the world. On the contrary, He had continuously built upon it. Before today, I hadn't expected such a thing to occur, he said. But this child, throw her into the abyss, Cronus, the goddess of luminous, said coldly. She has no godhood, so even if she is confined there, nothing will happen. Just let her eternally slumber there. Today marked the end of the relationship between Asteria and Perse, and Phoebe's hope to be like her sister Thea had also ended, all because of the birth of this child. As a deity of chaos, the stability of parent-child relationships was never guaranteed, and relations between generations were no different than with strangers. For her granddaughter, Phoebe felt only aversion. Forget it, Phoebe. Ceus, however, shook his head and dissuaded his wife. He remembered his second daughter's request before coming to the Mount of the Gods. Despite her dislike for Perse and the child as well, faced with the baby's innocent large eyes, she had pleaded with her father not to cast her into the abyss. Exile her instead. Let her go to the earth to live and perish on her own. Her meager divine power is almost non-existent, and as a newborn deity, she will not remember the events surrounding her birth. Let her believe she was a mundane creature created by the gods, living among mortals. What do you think, Chryas? As he spoke, Ceus looked at his former in-law. Of course, my brother. Let's do as you suggest. Chryas naturally had no reason to object. He was equally devoid of sentiment towards this newborn deity called Hecate. As a deity, her birth elicited only one response from the law, which was to proclaim her true name. Such offspring held no interest for the god of meteorology. Glancing at his two brothers, since a conclusion had been reached, Cronus hesitated no more. He mobilized the authority of the divine king, and a formidable power close to divine power, level 20, surged within him. No matter what the birth of this child signified, he had to show his brothers that his authority as divine king had only increased, not diminished from the past. In the name of the divine king, he gently raised the scepter in his hand, its 3 gemstones glinting brightly. Just as Cronus had anticipated, feeling the undiminished power of the divine king, the other 4 titans present all breathed sighs of relief. Regardless of whether the laws of the current world were discontented, since the instigator, the divine king, was unharmed, they naturally would not face any more serious consequences. This actually made the god of meteorology abandon the idea of withdrawing from the Mount of the Gods. He was not a subordinate of Cronus. If there were any disagreements, he could always choose to leave. Perse and Asteria's daughter, Hecate, born on the day of the spirit count, your existence has violated the majesty of the gods, and you have brought shame upon the deity race. Now, by the authority of the divine king, I banish you from the divine fold. From this moment on, you are no longer a member of the Titan deity clan. Beginning today, you will only associate with mortal things. The domains of the gods will close their gates to you. Redeem yourself in your eternal life, for this is my final judgment upon you. Adet Novel Benedet. The majestic voice echoed in the hall, the sound traveling from Mount Otherworld, but strictly confined to the nearby sky. The next moment, wrapped in divine power, the infant girl was flung from the mountain and plummeted towards the land below. Divine power collided with the air currents, and the interaction of light and heat turned the falling light fiery red. It fell from the sky to the earth, signifying the fall of a deity to the mortal realm. Cohen, leader of the humans, my servant. Cronus did not speak, yet his voice invisibly transferred to the earth below, to ensure that this unexpected offspring faced no other mishaps. Cronus cast her directly toward the human tribal settlement near the mountain and used his divine power to issue a command to the leader of the humans. In the past, he had done this more than once, and unlike the gods, humans always saw his will as the highest honor. Born of a god yet abhorred by the deity race, she is Hecate, the impure sinner. She will live among humans from now on, but without permission, no one shall privately converse with her. The command spread to the earth, reaching the ears of the human in hemp clothing before the temple. 1,000 years had passed, and Cohen's appearance was unchanged, showing no signs of aging. He wasn't startled by the voice that appeared suddenly by his ear. Instead, he watched a fiery orb fall from the heavens, striking before the temple and melting the stone slab at its doors into a hollow space. As the flame and heat dissipated, a tiny life form he had never seen before appeared there. She was bathed in flames, yet remained unharmed. Without any superfluous emotions, Cohen prostrated on the ground, as usual, offering prayers to the deity. "I obey, great king of all gods." Faced with the divine edict, the golden humanity needed not to think. What the gods say is right. Just as fire raining from the sky heralds kneeling in front of the temple, he prayed silently for a long time before Cohen stood up. He looked at the infant girl before him and lifted up the swaddling clothes that enveloped her. She was created by the divine power of Leto, the goddess of nursery, the sister of Asteria. Compared to other gods, Leto and the goddess of meteor did show a trace of pity for Hecate, but that was all. Out of fear for the laws of the current world, both goddesses also regarded her as a calamity. Just as in Laine's previous life, mortals would fear fire, storms, and the blazing sun, though actually, these elements had no consciousness of their own. Similarly, the gods of chaos also felt fear, even though the will that caused their fear had never cast even a fleeting gaze upon Hecate. Fear stems from the unknown. And since the inception of chaos, besides Laine, who opened the spirit realm, only the primordial gods had some deep understanding of the logic of the current world's operation. Clearly, the tenuous kinship among deities was not enough for them to confront their fears. Hecate, is that her name? He sighed. As humans were a species created first and naturally born as adults, Cohen was unaware that the little infant before him could actually grow up. Seeing such a harmless creature identified as a sinner, Cohen also felt some reluctance. But golden humanity would not question the gods, so he merely thought there was something lacking in his own thoughts. Had it novel been at? It seemed as if sensing something, Hecate, who had only been born for half a day, turned her black eyes and giggled at Cohen, who held her. Clearly, the young deity did not seem to realize that her fate had just taken an abrupt turn. When fire descends from the sky, calamities will arise. Just uncertain where this disaster will strike this time. The wars of the gods in the heavens are beyond the observation and understanding of mortals. But whenever stars are shattered, the fragments that fall to the mortal realm always bring disasters. Moreover, the shattering of stars often signifies that a god of stars has lost their dwelling and is about to enter eternal slumber. Hence in the past, gods told humanity that when streaks of light crossed the sky, an unknown disaster was unfolding in some corner of the world. Hecate was born from the falling light, bathed in fire, and she herself was despised by the gods. Cohen did not know where the disaster originated from, but his nature as golden humanity made him worried about it. Shaking his head, the priority was to execute the divine king's command. Cohen turned around, looking towards the golden humanity drawn by the anomaly and gathering around. "King, has the great divine king conveyed another divine oracle to you?" Someone in the crowd asked. Seeing this, people turned their gaze towards Cohen. They felt a hint of envy. After all, for the people of the Golden Age, listening to a divine oracle was the greatest honor. Yes. Nodding slightly, Cohen held up the swaddling clothes in his hands. His gaze slowly swept over the crowd, looking at every human. "Her name is Hecate, another creature created by the gods." Facing the gathered crowd, Cohen solemnly said, "But she is inherently guilty, and the gods are displeased with her." At his words, there was a moment of unrest in the crowd, but it soon calmed down. The innate reverence for the gods made them instinctively dislike this life they had never seen before, but the people of the Golden Age lacked negative emotions, so they couldn't harbor feelings of animosity towards her. However, the will of the gods supersedes all. Regardless of personal thoughts, humans would choose obedience in the face of a divine king's decree. The great king of all gods Cronus, who rules over everything from atop Mount Otherworld, has passed down his decree. He commanded that she live among us, but without permission, no one is to communicate with her. From this moment forth, all are forbidden to speak of her relation to the gods, and I will build a house for this life at the farthest place from the temple. What about food? Someone asked. What does she eat, and what do we need to prepare for her? There's no need. Cohen shook his head. She requires no food or drink. Though she will feel hunger, it will not kill her. Let her fend for herself. It seems the bodily suffering must be the deity's punishment for her, and we should comply. Ensure she's not harmed by other lives, but that's all we shall do. Beyond this, we do nothing. To stand by as others suffer was not an easy decision for golden humanity. But if it was the will of the gods, it was not hard to accept. Since the gods do not allow us to reveal her past, should I still record the events of today? Another asked. It was Hua, among the golden humanity, the one responsible for recording history. In the beginning, humans carved every interaction with the gods onto the pillars of the temple. Later, when the pillars were filled, they began recording on huge stone slabs. Humans originated from divine creation, and present civilizations stem from the civilization slate, so they fashioned their records after the slate's likeness, erecting it before each temple, chronicling the past with images and writing. Record it, but omit any parts related to the gods. After a moment's hesitation, Cohen finally decided. Hecate, born into light on the night of spirit count, emerged from fire, the person of original sin. Her arrival to the mortal realm on the night of the spirit count would bring disaster to the world. But remember, Hua, all this is the judgment of humans, unrelated to the gods. Understood. Hearing this, Hua nodded. Humans are not eternal. He was aware of this. Compared to the lifespan of humans, stones endure much longer. To enshrine these stone slabs that record history in front of the temples was Hua's way of expressing his reverence to the gods. After addressing a few more questions and seeing that there were no objections from those present, Cohen waved his hand to dismiss the surrounding humans. Turning around, he left Hecate in front of the temple, instructing a dedicated person to watch over her, and then set off toward a distant forest with only two others. It was one of the places where golden humanity obtained their water, and he planned to build a dwelling for this being from the heavens in the center of that forest, near a small river. The gods did not require him to provide Hecate with food, but the nature of golden humanity made it difficult for him to watch another life suffer. Thus, Cohen decided to build a dwelling there. If this being possessed wisdom and knew how to learn, then she would be able to find food in the forest and draw water from the river by herself. But if she were as ignorant as those also created by the gods, yet lacked the capacity for thought like humans, then that was her fate. Just as they revered the gods, golden humanity also revered fate. Based on the fragments they understood from the words of the gods, they knew that fate and wisdom seemed to be closely linked. If Hecate lacked wisdom, it indicated that even fate had on the night of spiritual counts, meteors fell from the sky, and in the blink of an eye, more than 70 years had passed. Time hurried by, but for humans, apart from the more frequent abnormal twinkling of the sun and the increasingly common sight of falling stars, nothing much around Mount Otherworld had changed. The environment had not changed because it was influenced by the power of Mount of the Gods, where it was evergreen all year round, and the scenery remained as usual. The humans had not changed, naturally, because that is just how the people of the Golden Age were. If not for that unexpected dream, perhaps they would have remained unchanged until the day they died. However, in the monotonous flow of life, there was a little anomaly. The creature who had once been brought to the human tribe was gradually growing up. She had an appearance like a deity, yet she was different from humans. Humans resembled male gods. She resembled a female goddess, though she was a goddess who never grew up. Even though the humans, following the divine king's command, never interacted with her, with the passing of time, some of her peculiar traits inevitably began to circulate among them. The sinner who stole the authority of deities, That is what humans called her, and the power she held. Just like the records of Hecate's descent, this too was engraved on the stone tablets, forever remaining in front of the temple. Sasa, Sasa, barefoot on the forest leaves, listening to the sound of the wind passing through the leaves. With red hair and a red dress, Hecate walked with a light step along the stream, heading towards her little cabin. La la la, finally, I can go back. Humming a tune, having finished a morning's practice at the edge of the woods, Hecate was in a very good mood. Or rather, except for her childhood, Hecate's mood was always quite cheerful. She was not very tall by future standards. She was about 1 meter 50-something in height. But matched with her youthful cheeks, it did not seem out of place. It might have been due to the scarcity of divine power, or perhaps for some other reason. But it took a full 50 years for this deity, who was originally a minor goddess of crossroads and mistress of souls in the underworld, to finally enter the stage of rapid growth for a deity. Then, another 20 or so years passed, and Hecate's appearance remained that of a 14 or 15-year-old girl, without a sign of further aging. Uncle Cohen, it's you again. Moving on, at a nearby bend in the stream, Cohen was standing next to a large barrel, too big for one person to embrace, scooping water with a wooden ladle. However, in response to Hecate's greeting, Cohen only twitched the corner of his eye, then gave no further reply. Aren't you the king of humans? Why do you have to draw water yourself every time? Not getting a response, Hecate was not surprised, but she continued to ask. Cohen remained silent in response. At it novel Benedette. The divine king on Mount of the Gods doesn't do this. He has nymphs and the oak tree goddess to do things for him. A god's king can command other deities. Why can't you? Although Cohen wanted very much to say, you've never been to Mount of the Gods, so how do you know about the affairs of deities? Moreover, gods and humans are different. The divine king is supreme, but due to Cronus's oracle, he still did not respond a word. And actually, deep down, he thought that if what Hecate said was true, then it was not unreasonable. After all, humans venerated all deities equally. This was a concept written into the soul at creation. Their greater veneration for the divine king was not innate, but because the other deities acknowledged Cronus as king. So for the concept of gods serving other gods, it was still something that humans had a hard time grasping. To the humans on the great seas, in their eyes, there was no difference between the divine king and the sea gods. So slow, after a while, Hecate grew impatient. Although she had gradually become accustomed over the years, she still found many of the others' actions unacceptable. For instance, if you can carry a bucket while walking, why still use such a small wooden ladle? For example, she had tried to teach them other knowledge, but not a single person accepted. Another example would be the ability to build temples as big as hills, yet not willing to dig a canal to divert water from other places to their settlement. Hecate did ask, but no one responded, and she had also secretly listened to their conversations with each other. However, humans seemed to take this for granted. In private, people would say that they would use the knowledge taught by the deities, but they wouldn't learn things of unknown origin. Or to put another way, whatever Hecate could invent was rejected by the golden humanity. Creation, that was the domain of gods. Whatever was created, it was not something a mortal could achieve. And gradually, people came to believe that she was shunned by the gods because she had offended divine authority. Forget it, I'll help you. Ignoring Cohen's silent refusal, Hecate reached out her little hand. She made a gesture as if she were lifting something, and an invisible force followed. In an instant, something filled the air, and that force formed a large hand composed of an energy field. But all of this was invisible to the naked eye. The water in the creek, as if drawn by some force, flowed out of the shallow, narrow riverbed. In a few breaths, the bucket was filled. There you go. Uncle Cohen, your bucket is full. I'm going back now. Clapping her hands and knowing there would be no reaction from him, Hecate just smiled and then walked past Cohen, continuing towards her own abode. Behind her, Cohen glanced at the departing fiery red figure, furrowed his brow slightly, but still said nothing. It was this strange power again. Starting about 30 years ago from some unknown time, This life that fell from the sky had suddenly gained the power to affect nature. Although her power was still weak and nowhere near the supreme authority of the deities, having many things in itself was a form of blasphemy. Sinner, did she steal divine power? Shaking his head, Cohen picked up the bucket and walked towards the settlement. To Cohen, this bucket, which would be too heavy for 10 men to lift in later generations, was like nothing. His strength was almost at the pinnacle of all things, and even if there were proper methods, the transcendent domain wouldn't be able to stop him. But the current world had no path of cultivation, and even if there were, golden humanity did not care about strength. Thus, thousands of years ago, Cohen already possessed such a physique, and thousands of years later, today he showed no change. Passing 7 fruit trees, avoiding 3 animal nests with docile residents, the woods gradually began to thin out. In the heart of the woods that Hecate named Red Leaf Woods, her small wooden hut built on a clearing was now within sight. The hut was originally built by Cohen, but Hecate later modified it. She adorned the outside with fresh flowers and various colored stones, and used magic power to keep them evergreen throughout all seasons. Creak, I'm back. Pushing open the door, Hecate greeted the empty wooden hut as if talking to herself. But there was no response. Just as it had been for the past decades, no one but herself had ever set foot in this place. She prepared a dinner for herself, just some wild fruits she picked on the roadside. Hecate returned to her bedroom, ready to start the part of the day she most looked forward to. Apart from the primeval titans, no one was born with knowledge of it, and Hecate was no exception, but she had a little secret she had never shared with anyone before. After learning to write secretly the second year, on her way back to the hut, she picked up a treasure. It was a star-filled night without the moon. The brightest star, whose name was unknown to all, shone especially bright on that day. According to the calendar passed down among humans, Hecate knew it was the day of her birth. Unlike other times, the day of spirituality came only once every 4 years, and on that day, the moon was always absent from the sky. Some gods said that day symbolized the birth of evil. Others claimed it was linked to the creator of humanity. But Hecate didn't care about that. So while the golden humanity gathered in front of the temple to worship the gods, she sneaked off to other places to look at the storytelling stone tablets recording history. Ordinarily, humans would not allow her to approach the temple. For a person forsaken by the gods to come near the place where gods were worshipped was indeed a desecration. However, as the worship ceremony of the golden humanity ended and she was hastily returning, Hecate stumbled over something hard and then discovered this magical relic. This was something she had seen many times, but not one of them was a real treasure. Stone tablet, oh stone tablet, do you have a story to tell me today? In the cramped cabin, Hecate held something very familiar looking in her arms and talked to it in a soliloquy. Are there really humans who disrespect the gods in this world? I feel like the people in your stories are nothing like Uncle Cohen and the others. However, the stone tablet remained the same, not showing any other reaction. Nothing again? Although I've grown up, does that mean I can't listen to stories anymore? Slightly unhappy, but the little girl still accepted reality. After all, in recent years, she hadn't seen many interesting stories on the stone tablet. You should meditate now. Without a sound or a shadow, the ink converged and reorganized, and a line of text slowly emerged from the stone tablet. Today is the time for you to break through the 5th barrier and also the first step towards becoming transcendent. To divine beings, mundane objects cannot be injured. Only forces that have been purified by rules can cause them substantial harm. I know, what's the rush? What barrier? Isn't it just about having hands to do it? She pouted, but Hecate still carefully placed the stone tablet beside her bed. The first time she saw it, the old stone tablet was as tall as a person and had begun to yellow, but in her hands, it became just the right size for her to carry. Hecate didn't know its origin, but she had some vague guesses. She had seen too many of the same style over the years. So troublesome, but according to what you said, once I step into transcendence, I won't need rituals anymore, right? Muttering to herself, She stood up and took out several bottles and jars from a corner of the room. Their design was rough, marked with the juice of plants of different colors. They were fired from clay in a special way by her. She once wanted to teach this technique to humans, but they refused to accept it. In that era, humans did not have the ability to create fire on their own. Naturally, anything produced by fire was seen as an attempt to steal divine authority. Picking up the bottles one by one, Hecate poured out some liquid from within. She mixed them in the right proportions in a small bowl and stirred counterclockwise with the stem of the moon spirit flower for 3.5 turns. She added a measure of rainwater to symbolize the wind, 2 measures of steam to symbolize fire, as well as 3 measures of river water and 4 measures of fountain water to respectively symbolize water and earth. This was merely the most rudimentary method. Like the incense and special life feathers she had learned were more suitable to embody wind, representing communication, planning, and thought. Candles and scepters were more suitable to represent fire, symbolizing execution, initiative, and willpower. However, the conditions for such things were not available, or rather, things like incense, besides Hecate herself, had never been heard of even by the gods on Mount of the Gods, so this was how she had always substituted them. Beyond materials, in the realm of numerology, 3 and 7 possess special significance, and thus, Hecate took half of 7, using a reverse method to symbolize the antithesis of the material. These were all efficient ways of using inferior materials. If the materials themselves possessed extraordinary power, she would not need to make it so complicated. After the liquid was prepared, she waited briefly until the liquid within the small bowl mingled into one, gradually turning into a peculiar color. From a shelf nearby, Hecate took a pen made of animal hair and twigs, designed for drawing symbols and patterns. No matter how many times one looks at it, this color always seems a bit strange, doesn't it? Observing the splendid darkness within the bowl, Hecate commented, "Had it novel been at, but no help for it, as the combination of earth, water, wind, and fire, harmonized by spirituality, represented a third of chaos in the mystical domain. Therefore, it didn't matter what color the liquid originally was. Visually, it always looked like this color." Picking up the pen and dipping it into the liquid in the bowl, Hecate walked to the entrance. She drew a special symbol on the ground. As the characters were written, an invisible force was activated. It is said that this writing stemmed from the original spirit script. They were not as powerful as their source, but for that very reason, they could be utilized by mortals. The symbol Hecate penned down signified isolation. Subsequently, she wrote symbols that represented connection, purification, and sublimation on the other 3 sides in turn. Once everything was complete, she connected the 4 points with a line and then stood at the center. Alpha Psi, barely opening her mouth, accompanied by 2 special syllables, the power within the 4 runes linked together. There are 3 distinct types of rituals. One imitates history, another incites rules, and the last pleases higher beings. Setting aside the other 2, the ritual Hecate was presently preparing belonged to the second type. As the ritual progressed, the pre-written rules were triggered. Hecate faintly felt that an expansive world had revealed itself to her spiritual senses. That was the spirit realm, an interface composed of spiritual force. Yet, at this point in time, without special means, no existence could establish contact with the spirit realm. Clearly, however, Hecate's imperfect ritual was one of those special methods. Sitting cross-legged on the ground, with her eyes half closed, Hecate began to channel her spirit. She deftly followed the subtle connection, linking with the vast spirit realm. Countless bizarre shadows flickered by, strange sounds echoed, but all were purified and then isolated. When everything settled back to calm, within Hecate's spiritual sea, there were only 7 lunar phases reflecting upon her ethereal spiritual body. At the same time, on the surface of Hecate's spiritual body, lunar phases similarly emerged. However, only 4 were tangible, while the 7 phases of meditation This was special knowledge Hecate had learned from the slab. According to the slab, meditation was a way to subtly enhance the spirituality of all things through the influence of higher beings. This higher being could be a life form, an object, or even a concept, which could be sought both externally and internally. Of course, meditation was not aimless daydreaming. Only the correct method could ensure personal safety while growing and purifying the meditator's spirituality. Like the 7 phases of meditation, it was a method to draw in the lunar light of the 7 moons of the spirit realm to absorb spiritual energy and strengthen oneself. A plain name, a true and solid effect. Now that Hecate had consolidated the presence of 4 moon phases, she had reached the pinnacle of all beings. The next step was the transcendent domain. Transcendence was not the same as godhood, but only through transcendence could one come into contact with the law. No matter how powerful, the strength of all beings was meaningless before divine power. Only by touching the law could one inflict real and effective harm. Spirituality originates from the moon phases. The moon is his eye. The pillar that props the sky penetrates 7 strings, flowing through the boundaries of 10 nations. With tangible items bearing intangible vessels, return to the initial one. Whispering the incantations lightly, the spiritual forces around her surged like tides, continuously pouring into Hecate's spirit. The 5th lunar phase slowly coalesced, and she didn't feel the barrier that should theoretically exist. This was normal, for although without godhood, Hecate's essence was still that of a deity, an immortal being. Instead of relying on meditation to break through, it was more like she was filling an empty vessel with power. Infusing such power, different from divine power, yet endlessly variable. In a distant place, some life form from the spirit realm seemed to have detected the fluctuations here. It wanted to approach, an instinct telling it that if it could devour the spiritual body of this unknown being, it could undergo an unimaginable transformation. Yet there was also a premonition, a sense that if it dared to do so, it would be utterly erased from existence. After hesitating for a while, it lingered for a long time, but ultimately overcame its instincts and reluctantly left the place. Some talent there. In the midst of the air, beneath the pale gray robe, the young deity, watching everything, commented, "Not all life could overcome instinct, especially those without wisdom." Moreover, the inspiration of the other was quite high, being able to vaguely detect the presence of danger. Meditation, interesting. A strong spirit gives birth to stronger dreams. It's a pity, though, that this kind of enhancement of the spirit seems to allow one to control one's thoughts, even in sleep, not as random and disorderly as other beings. I really wish there were more life on the land. I wonder how long it will take for my divine power to reach its limit at this pace. Shaking his head, the figure disappeared in a flash of wings, and Hecate, completely unaware, continued her meditation. With her potential, such breakthroughs were effortless. The chasms that mortals of later generations found insurmountable, she could step over just by lifting her leg. And so, uneventfully, her spiritual body grew even stronger. The essence of her magic power ascended, and Hecate succeeded in taking this step, becoming the first legendary Witch of Chaos. The next morning, as the sun rose and shone on her red dress, Hecate gradually awoke from her meditation. Opening her eyes, she flicked her fingertips lightly, and the trinket on the table floated up. This time, she used no magic power, just the action of pure spiritual force. Spirit was not the same as the soul. It was an external force of the soul. A powerful soul only indicated a strong potential in the spiritual domain, akin to godhood and divine power. But unlike godhood, there were many ways to gradually strengthen the soul. When the spirit directly influenced matter without needing magic as a medium, that was one of the most basic characteristics of a legendary witch. This signified that the spiritual force had undergone a fundamental transformation. It was also the origin of the name transcendent. To transcend the mundane was naturally to be called transcendent. Transcendence, or rather, legendary. Is this what it feels like? She murmured softly, and Hecate sensed many things she couldn't see clearly before between all things. That was the manifestation of laws. In the past, due to her divine nature, she could always see them. But only today did she clearly perceive that she could not only see but also touch them. You have succeeded. On the surface of the slab, words slowly emerged, drawing Hecate's attention immediately. Of course, I didn't feel the barrier at all. She hummed with a hint of pride, but then fell silent, as if suddenly reminded of something. After a moment of hesitation, she asked softly, "Now that I've broken through transcendence and become a legendary witch, can I defeat a god now?" If it's a territorial god, you could try. But a true god, even the weakest, is far beyond your reach. Without concealment, the words on the slab were always so direct. "Is that so?" Brushing the non-existent dust from her red dress, Hecate sat on the bed. Since picking up this mysterious slab not long ago, and realizing it was at least harmless to her for now, she had inquired about the confusions she had always had. Who am I? Where do I come from? And why am I here? Then the slab pulled her into memory, where she personally experienced that scene from decades ago. Being a new god, Hecate was not born with this knowledge, but that didn't mean she had no memory of her birth. Just like mortals of future generations, those memories, without special methods, would only ever reside permanently deep within her mind. But in the face of the very essence of memory itself, none of these were a problem. Throw her into the abyss, a disgrace to the deity race. As the father of the god of punishment, I am deeply sorry, and the first glimpse at birth of the two goddesses, initially full of anticipation, which quickly turned to disappointment and disgust. All these had manifested before Hecate, just as if she had relived them again. So what do I want to do to them? Imprison them, torture them, make them regret abandoning you? As the words reappeared, Hecate shook her head. I don't know, actually. Aside from that goddess who wanted to throw me into the abyss and that so-called father, I don't really hate the others much. If I had to say, I want to first possess the same kind of powerful strength they have, and then think about what comes next. As she said, considering that her existence brought them calamity and hence they wanted to stay away from her, was not something difficult to accept. At most, because of their abandonment, she would henceforth have nothing to do with them. But after learning about the existence of Tartarus from that stone tablet, Hecate started to dislike that goddess of luminous, Phoebe, her nominal grandmother, a bit. And even more so Perse, the god of destruction, this so-called father, she disliked him a lot. However, I have thought of something. I want to make that divine king regret his decision, she said. Not that he expelled me from the Titan deity clan, but that the Titan deity clan doesn't have the eligibility to contain my existence. That's quite difficult. After all, he is a divine king. So, do you have a way? Hecate asked, looking at the stone tablet. Yes, but it's not easy. Even now, you only have the qualifications to start the first step. Only a deity can oppose a deity, or rather, at least in the current world, there isn't an intelligent existence beyond gods that can threaten them. So, if you want to master the power to confront a deity, then you must find a way to become one of their ranks first. Become one of them? Huh, I was supposed to be one of them in the first place. Curving her lips into something like a smile, Hecate stroked her hair and continued to ask, So what should I do? It should be very difficult to become a true god with meditation alone. Indeed, gods are gods because they control dominions and govern a part of the world. Pure meditation is meaningless. The only way you want to gain godhood is to create one yourself. Create one. Yes, create one. Belong to you, something that you create bit by bit. When it blankets the sky, covers the earth, penetrates the seas, when it becomes an indispensable part of all spirits. As its creator, you will possess the power to confront any Titan principal god. However, staying here, you won't be able to do these things. You need to travel to every corner of the world, and with your spirit, experience the flow of elements and the changes of laws. At it novel Benedette. I understand, Hecate smiled. So, Is this also your purpose? She recalled a story that the stone tablet once told her, a story about a little girl and a diary. The content of the story was not important. What mattered was that it cautioned others to never trust an intelligent being unless you could see where its thoughts were. Of course, this is exactly why I sought you. You have the potential far beyond what you could imagine. But as usual, the stone tablet responded without any concealment. However, if you refuse, I can also think of other methods. All right then, I'll listen to you. Without hesitation, Hecate nodded. She tied up her red hair and snapped her fingers. Everything in the wooden house, as if brought to life, bounced and hopped into her pocket. The palm-sized pocket seemed to be bottomless, fitting everything except the furniture, yet showing no sign of being filled. After packing up her belongings, Hecate brought her hands together. An invisible surge enveloped the hut and the nearby clearing, hiding its traces. Finally, she picked up the stone tablet and said with a smile, "Stone tablet, oh stone tablet, you're too eye-catching like this. How about a change? Turn to a book. Can you do it?" Without responding, the stone tablet visibly changed shape. Seconds later, it transformed into a book of unknown material. This time, the book really did seem like a book, feeling like real paper rather than resembling a bronze ornament, like its siblings. "Very good," Hecate said with a satisfied smile, hugging the book to her chest. "Now, you're the treasure of grand sorceress Hecate. From now on, you shall be called Tome of All Spells." Without any hesitation, as her spirit moved, the surrounding wind elements answered Hecate's call, lifting her body into mid-air. Hecate had no sentimentality towards this place where she had lived for so long. She only took one last look, then flew off into the distance. The stone tablet advised her to leave, without specifying where to go. She heard that at the edge of the continent was the sea. She wanted to see it with her own eyes. The world was so vast, she wanted to verify for herself whether those things in the stories were real or not. Hecate had left, and the golden humanity did not notice her departure. But in a place unknown to her, high up on the Mount of the Gods, the divine king's gaze followed her retreating figure. He reached out his hand again, but sensing an approaching presence, he ultimately lowered it. The affairs of the stars without the help of the god of the sky, Zeus, were indeed difficult to handle. But if there were another helper, then things might become a bit easier than he anticipated. Standing in the sky, wrapped in a refreshed set of black clothes, Laine watched as Hecate's figure receded into the distance. Thousands of years ago, before he had opened the spirit realm, he had negotiated 3 conditions with Cronus in the underworld. The origin of time and space transformed into the foundation of the spirit realm. The concept of the moon, naturally fitting with the spirit realm's Een symbol, became a part of Laine. But the last requirement, the prophesied network controlling the elements, Laine seemed to have forgotten about it and had not taken action for quite some time. It wasn't that he couldn't do it. In fact, if he had done it himself, within a month or 2, he could have woven the elemental network that pervaded the present world of chaos. However, this actually held no meaning for him. Like many of the current literary godhoods, even if the magic web were to be born now, it would just be a tool for sorting out the elemental power in the mortal world, nothing more. Without enough users, and without sufficient source power to fill it, the magic web could at most support a god with weak divine power. Laine had countless such powers at his disposal. It was merely a matter of lacking appropriate vessels. Although the magic web was somewhat special, there was no need for him to get involved personally. He was the lord of the spirit realm, not a worker there. With Hecate's current progress, by the time she accumulated enough and used the power of the spirit realm to weave the magic web into shape, the third era would be almost upon them. It was when humans capable of procreation appeared in mass that the magic web was truly meant to shine. As its position within history and civilization grew increasingly high, and as the gods began using it, it would be able to take root deeply in the mortal world based on the spirit realm, becoming an indispensable part of chaos. At that time, as the weaver and the first god of the magic web. It would be the moment for Hecate to show her full potential. Even Laine himself was unclear about the extent of power the magic web might possess at its peak. He was looking forward to it. Of course, the initial version of the magic web would probably differ from what Laine remembered. He needed wizards, not mages. The so-called spell slots would likely not appear in the earliest version of the magic web. Even now, there was no such thing as a spell model because Laine himself did not know it. It wasn't that he couldn't create it, but there was no need to. Rather than defining its scope from the very beginning, it was better to let it grow wildly. When the time came for a multitude of flowers to bloom, then they would step in to set the rules. Besides, ascending a mortal to godhood was simple for him. He just needed to bestow godhood. But for mortals to ascend on their own, Laine had no idea how to achieve that yet. The current version of the 7 phases of meditation only went so far as to touch divinity, granting long life. Laine was even unclear about what the true state of a demigod meant. This type of demigod wasn't like the 3,000 evil spirits born alongside Hypnos, the god of sleep, nor was it like Perseus in later ages, who barely managed to defeat sea monsters with the aid of divine artifacts. It was more like Heracles before his apotheosis, who, although mortal, possessed enough strength to contend with true gods. He could even temporarily replace the sky-supporting Titan Atlas. Such power was rare, even among the gods. A person's wisdom is, after all, limited. I wonder if those great sages of Greece will emerge as expected in the distant future. When the most exceptional wise men amongst humans have the opportunity to personally encounter transcendent power, what will they bring to this world? With some anticipation in his heart, but without lingering any longer, Laine turned to look in the direction of Mount Otherworld. He was indifferent, but if he stayed any longer, Cronus might be unable to restrain himself. If it were anyone other than him, any other deity would have dared to interact with Hecate, seen by the divine king as a symbol of divine retribution, and would have probably been confronted by now. Such impatience. Shaking his head, Laine took a step and vanished silently from where he stood. In a flash of space, Laine arrived midway up Mount Otherworld. All that met his eyes was lush greenery, albeit a bit sparse. Faintly, the sounds of creatures frolicking reached him, the nymphs who dwelled on the Mount of the Gods. Quite a change. Muttering softly, Laine's powerful spiritual sense allowed him to perceive that as he vanished and reappeared, the gazes from Mount of the Gods were subtly focused on him. Had it novel been at. But since he had already arrived, he was in no hurry to ascend. Instead, Laine walked leisurely towards the summit, taking in the significantly altered scenery of the Mount of the Gods. When Themis was legislating, Laine had only traversed the summit once. Therefore, strictly speaking, his last visit had been when Uranus had just ascended to the throne. Compared to the past, there were now stone paths on the Mount of the Gods, as well as beautiful nymphs flitting through the forests. The vegetation on the mountain had changed a lot too. They were no longer the original batch of plants, and apart from serving as food, they were no longer of use to the gods. Walking up the mountain path, Laine was not hiding his form, yet all living creatures seemed to look right through him. However, Cronus was inevitably different. He was the divine king, possessing the godhood of time and space. So the moment Laine reached the peak, Cronus's gaze turned to where he stood. "It's been a long time, Cronus," said Laine with a nod, greeting him as one would an old friend. "I've taken Hecate with me. But since you've already expelled her from the Titan deity clan, I suppose you won't mind this little matter, right?" "It's the Titan deity clan, Laine." It seemed like the corner of Cronus's mouth twitched, but it was fleeting. "It's all the same." Stepping forward to stand beside Cronus, Laine found that this spot was indeed quite good. Just like how he looked down upon the 7 realms from Mount Sinai, being on the world's highest mountain, the place closest to the sky, standing here naturally elicited a feeling that everything was within one's grasp. Some things have no significance if only you recognize them. They only truly exist when they are acknowledged by all. It seemed as though he was talking about the title of the Titans, but Cronus knew that Laine was actually alluding to his position as the divine king. A divine king recognized by only a few gods is not truly a divine king. Only one recognized by all the gods is. Hecate is the original sin born of the world's curse. Her existence led to the imbalance of the starry situation. Not wanting to dwell on a verbal defeat, Cronus shifted the conversation. Taking her away is your right, of course, but you also need to contribute to the situation of the cosmos. Hyperion has offended you before, and although he has paid the price, everyone knows that, given the chance, he would definitely seek revenge. As long as you stand with me, I won't pursue Hecate's matter any further, and I might even hand over some star domains for your god of stars to manage after the dispute over the cosmos is settled, he bargained. Turning around, he looked Laine straight in the eye. Cronus wasn't the tallest among the Titans, but as a king, he was becoming increasingly qualified. They're true gods of the cosmos, just as the sea god occupies unclaimed seas, drawing power from the star domains. I only require that they do not resist my rule. Everything else is up to you. You have invited others, haven't you? Like Ether, the god of heavenly light from the underworld. Without waiting for a reply, Laine asked with a smile. Yes, Cronus nodded, and Hemera, the goddess of daylight, who is always by his side. The world is growing larger, and the number of star domains in the cosmos is increasing. As long as they submit to my rule, I don't care who they belong to. I understand, so, after a pause, Laine spoke. Are you no longer able to delay? Observing the sudden change in Cronus's expression, Laine blessed him with a smile. It seems that in at most 1,000 years, your offspring will be born. Congratulations in advance, Cronus. Since you need my help, let's consider it a congratulatory gift given ahead of time. Sometimes, I really don't want to communicate with a god like you. Taking a deep breath, Cronus's complexion swiftly returned to normal. His efforts to rally help were not unknown to Laine. In fact, most of the gods on his side were aware of this. However, except for his queen of gods, everyone thought this was a measure of the divine king, unwilling to accept defeat, promising benefits everywhere. But now, Laine saw at a glance the real reason he did so was because his divine child was about to be born. If he could not take control of the starry sky now, afterwards, he might not have the time to consider this matter. It's not hard to guess, Cronus, you've always been like this. From when you deceived your father with words back in the day, to the moment you bravely took up the sickle when everything was ready. Given a choice, you always want the best, but if there's no choice, you don't mind gambling once. Shaking his head, Laine felt somewhat emotional. In this regard, he felt that he might have some similarities with Cronus. Perhaps, but now I'm quite relieved. Smiling a bit, Cronus seemed a little more relaxed. It seems my first child is a goddess. At least she won't be the one who threatens my throne. What do you mean? Maybe because I've dealt with you more often, I understand you better. If the divine king were about to be replaced again, you wouldn't be discussing the starry sky with me, would you? At a loss for words, Laine had to admit Cronus was speaking the truth. He couldn't help but think that, possibly due to his influence, Cronus seemed much wiser than the myths portrayed. All right, let's not waste time, as you're probably not too interested in my Mount of the Gods. Stretching out his hand, and with the effect of divine power, a star map appeared in the hands of the divine king. Hundreds of spots of varying sizes and brightness appeared, each representing a star domain. Like oceanic domains, star domains are the standard divisions of the starry sky. You have 12 star gods under your command, and they have a leader, correct? Cronus's palm glided across the star map, slowly saying, aside from these core parts of the starry sky, you may choose any other. I don't mind, even if you take a few extra. Glancing over the star map, Laine casually asked, so what do you want, Eclipse? Melded with the solar eclipse, it is indeed much more powerful than before. It works well on the sun, but only on the sun. I know, which is why I want not just the Eater of Suns, but also the Codex of Creation. I need to borrow it. The goddess of light has her queen of gods in Crius, the god of meteorology, to fend off. Unlike Hyperion, the god of sun, Cronus had no intention of doing anything to the mother of light. A balanced starry sky was what he wanted. Moreover, having already anticipated a hefty price to seal a sun god, The growth in his divine authority wouldn't amount to much more than what he'd expend if he added the powerful Mother of Light. I needed to break open a seal. Despite Hyperion's strength no longer being formidable as the bifurcated god of sun, the origin of the celestial body of the sun remains as strong as ever. Nodding, Laine understood Cronus's thoughts. Like the ocean, although the original sea god Pontus greatly weakened due to the division of his godhood, the power of the ocean and water in the whole world continued to increase every day, and the sun was no different. Being the supreme celestial body of the starry sky, the seal it laid down cannot be easily broken by even a being of divine power level 20, let alone Cronus being somewhat short of that mark. But imprisoning the god of sun with the sun itself goes against the order. With the Codex of Creation, the divine king could easily release Helios. Only with another sun god in hand could there be a real possibility of victory in the conflict over the starry sky. Otherwise, even if Hyperion was defeated, faced with the masterless sun, the divine king would be at a loss. Fine, I can lend you the divine art. On Cronus's star map, there were hundreds of star domains, both large and small, but it's the core area around the sun and moon that represents the essence of the starry sky and the original boundaries of the starry sky at the beginning of the world. The remote areas are domains that extended as the world expanded. Their energy tides surged, and various desolate and dangerous places were numerous. Although not very dangerous for gods, these didn't add much help to the governing star gods of those domains. It would take thousands of years to gradually transform those areas into outstanding territories. Laine saw right through Cronus's double-edged strategy. By letting others have these star domains, he was also making them work to govern the starry sky. After all, as the divine king, even if those places were not under his direct control, as long as they changed because of him, he would be able to increase his power. Once the turmoil in the starry sky is over, if you still need my help, then we can talk about the star domains. Gazing at the orbital tracks of celestial bodies on the star map, Laine beckoned with his hand. The next moment, space rippled, and the brass book fell into his palm before flying towards the divine king. The thing you wanted. Well, if there comes a day, I will. Receiving it, feeling the divine artifact extremely compatible with his own divine authority, the divine king promised. But what about the eclipse? Don't worry. Laine shook his head. It has no wisdom, and once it leaves my vicinity, I fear it will not heed your commands. Let it stay in the spirit realm for the time being. When you need it, use the Codex to invoke the power of the spirit realm, and it will naturally appear. However, finally, glancing eastward, Laine said with a smile, you must remember to set the right time. If you summon it too early, it might not be able to distinguish friend from foe. I will. Nodding in response, Cronus quickly found the special page within the artifact. Seeing that matters were concluded, Laine waved his hand. His purpose for today was already achieved, and he had no intention of lingering. Since everything is done, I won't stay any longer. I wish you success, Cronus. A portal of light emerged, and with a step through, Laine's figure vanished. Atop Mount of the Gods, watching the spot from which Laine had departed, the divine king did not rush to leave, instead standing quietly for a moment longer. Through the matter with Hecate, Cronus had gained a deeper understanding of humans and deities. He had not realized the significance of faith, but he had discovered something else. If humans could possess free will and souls like Hecate, could they too have some potential to attract the attention of the World Master? If so, then Laine's interest in human knowledge made sense. Perhaps the other party wished to create some beings with enough potential. Sadly, the golden humanity had disappointed him. Creating worlds. This must be the secret of bestowing godhood. In addition to the corresponding power, one also needs a candidate capable of bearing it, mused Cronus. God of destruction, Purse, it remains to be seen whether one day your daughter will be the one to reprimand you. This is fitting as the price for your arrogant disrespect, he thought with a shake of his head. The divine king no longer dwelt on such musings, instead channeling power into the brass book in his hand, closely sensing this 1/3 of a top-tier sacred artifact. Unlike the sickle, though both seem to reside in the realm of high-grade artifacts when evaluated, Cronus immediately felt the difference when he actually held it. A naturally formed divine artifact was distinctly different from a man-made one, carrying no such user restrictions as the sickle. What's more, crucially, the brass book was just 1/3 of a complete artifact, harboring even more hidden power. A part of Genesis artifact, even just this fragment alone, is very close to that step. The divine authority of order. If this were my divine artifact, even if its greatest function isn't combat, when combined with the divine authority of the king, I could possess up to 70% of the Father God's power, he reflected. Uranus was truly capable of contending with and even defeating the personified primordial gods, which Cronus knew well. Even without taking that final step, an ordinary divine power level of 20 would only have 1/3 of his strength. The sky, divine authority, the symbol of paternal authority, each of these aspects suggested a slight step beyond the pinnacle of mighty divine power. And Cronus now had not yet achieved even 1/3 of that. Feeling a twinge of envy, yet looking at the brass book, Cronus had no intention of claiming it as his own. After all, he could feel that this artifact, similar to a bonded artifact, could be subdued by its owner at will. It's just an artifact, after all. In the future, I might not necessarily have a better one. Soon, when the starry heavens serve me, the mountains, too, shall bow before me, Cronus thought with a cold smile, recalling his eldest brother. Ocean deity, sovereign Oceanus, had already completely surpassed the ancient sea god Pontus. Without accidents, he would be the final victor of the struggle over the seas. No one knew if the expanding power of the ocean deity, sovereign, might harbor other ambitions. Thus, once the problem with the stars was resolved, the next target for suppression by Cronus would be him. 700 years had swiftly passed in the chaos world since the divine king acquired the divine artifact. From the birth of humanity, in the blink of an eye, millennia had passed. Gradually, even the lives from the Golden Age were coming to the end allowed by fate. As their bodies decayed and their souls leapt from the flesh, laden with insights and experiences gained from their lengthy lives, they followed the cryptic guidance back to the spirit realm. The soul and the body mutually influence each other, and these beings from the Golden Age, despite their primitive makeup, were especially favored by the deities. Many of them had been in contact with more than one deity and, consequently touched by divine power, their spiritual bodies also became peculiar. Just as the creatures from the Golden Age were more long-lived compared to those of later generations, so too were their souls. If the lifespan of ordinary material souls varied from 7 to 8 times that of their bodies, or even more, it could be foreseen that the spiritual bodies of these Golden Age beings all possessed lifespans measured in hundreds of thousands of years. Even for the spiritual bodies of the golden humanity, Laine had no doubt that if they did not come to the spirit realm, the souls tainted by divine power would not dissipate. Instead, they would wander over the land and skies, transforming into a sort of heroic spirit. Then, in the era of Zeus, along with other remnants of the Second Epoch, they were erased by a wave of the new divine king's hand. Beyond lifespan, the spiritual bodies of beings from the Golden Age often possessed extraordinary strength under the influence of divine power. This power was not evident in the physical world, but it was amplified in the spirit realm. Using this power, the vast majority quickly crossed the surface layer of the spirit realm and entered the nascent dream domain. There, they instinctively absorbed the scattered spiritual energy to further strengthen their soul bodies, or fought with naturally born spiritual bodies within the dream domain, devouring each other. Quite a few, in the process, gained memory fragments of other spiritual bodies, gradually awakening wisdom and learning to think. So, as time passed, a unique social structure composed of spiritual lives was born within the 3 layers of the spirit realm. Some powerful spiritual bodies chose dream fragments and infected them with their own power, then continually expanded their influence and territory. Once large enough, these expansive dream domains were noticed by the third layer of the spirit realm itself, ultimately reporting back to Laine. When Laine discovered this behavior, at first he was a bit angry. Such acts were akin to creating a realm within a realm, and even the instinctual laws of this world had issued bounties for this before, let alone Laine with his subjective thinking. But later, he realized that although these unique dream domains were controlled by their creators, the primary authority still belonged to the spirit realm. They were different from Laine. Their very existence stemmed from the power of spirituality, not an external origin. Therefore, Laine not only refrained from punishment, but, in the name of the Lord of the spirit realm, acknowledged their ownership over their own dream domains. Just like the angels of the spirit realm before receiving godhood, and the quasi-gods like star gods, river gods, mountain gods, lake gods, these spiritual lives suddenly transformed, becoming quasi-gods with domains of their own. They were not innate deities, so they were immortal, but not eternal. They lacked godhood, yet the dream domains they controlled were the grounds of their divine authority. The broader the dream domain, and the larger its proportion in the third layer of the spirit realm, the more powerful they grew. At novel Benedeth. As more and more such dream domains were born, the inner cycle of the spirit realm was slightly enhanced. For intelligent life, desire is the ladder of progress, and in order to become more potent, they always found methods that even Laine found surprising to better manage their dream worlds. Hence, Laine was generous in rewarding those who excelled. He wrote new rules into the laws of the interface. If a being contributed to the development of the spirit realm, then the power of the interface would tilt in its favor. Feeling the response from the spirit realm, these original pioneers of the dream domain were encouraged. They arrogantly declared themselves lords of the spirit realm, proclaiming that they were the chosen agents of the great and ancient spirit realm's will, dignified beings second only to the angels of the spirit realm. Regarding this, Laine simply smiled. The spirit realm was developing, and the outer world was changing as well. Unbeknownst to any, the god of sun had reclaimed nearly half of the cosmos, yet the battlefield was gradually moving away from the sun's domain. In such an environment, 700 years later, a war that would decide the possession of the cosmos erupted deep within the stars. In the depths of the starry sky, tens of thousands of star gods were arrayed on either side. In the battlefield of true gods, the existence of quasi-gods held greater value than their actual worth. As part of the starry expanses, their assembly here symbolized that the deities of both sides could receive the blessings from a half of the starry sky each controlled. In the midst of the battlefield, within the dark and icy void, several figures larger than celestial bodies clashed together, just as they did in the bygone millennia. In this place where the law of matter seemed weaker, they unfurled their forms and fought like the titanic gods of myth. Or, to put it another way, the titans from the later myths were merely shadows left by the titanic deities. Light, with a gentle cry, that was Thea, the mother of light. As in every instance before, the desolate starry heavens became even brighter. The starlight merged with the sunlight, transforming under divine authority into splendid ribbons. They streaked across the void, passing horizontally through the queen of God's body without touching any physical entity. This was a separation on the temporal plane, and if one did not possess special dominion or divine artifact, nearly no god could harm the goddess who dwelled in bygone times. However, Thea was unconcerned, for this was a war over the sovereignty of the starry sky, not a duel with the Queen of Gods. The ribbon trailing behind shattered in an instant in a skyful of threads, enveloping over 100 star gods and the leading atlas. With just a gentle collision, their divine bodies burst apart, and even the god of strength body was left with huge wounds. Clang! In silence, a sickle emblazoned with blood-red patterns emerged behind Thea. In its presence, the ribbons of light surrounding the goddess of light were effortlessly severed, as if they didn't exist, leaving a long gash on her arm. with a slight frown and seemingly superficial cuts. Thea found under the influence of divine power that her wounds were slow to heal. This wasn't her first time, so the goddess of light was not the least bit concerned about the injury on her body, instead returning with a punch to the side of the sickle. The goddess's delicate arm appeared lacking in strength, yet Rhea, the queen of gods, was forced back several steps by the blow, her face revealing an abnormal flush. The godhood that presided over the flow of time was inherently ill-suited for combat, and with the sun present, light was nearly doubled in strength. Even though Rhea, as the queen of gods, had greater divine power than the mother of light, the tide of battle was completely reversed. Without the help of the three oak goddesses in Atlas, if she weren't relying on a divine artifact, she wouldn't even be able to stall her opponent's onslaught. However, compared to the still friendly exchange between the two goddesses, on the other hand, the battlefield between Hyperion, the god of sun, and Crius, the god of meteorology, was an entirely different scene. The sun has always been fierce and intense, and Hyperion was especially so. Even compared to his own wife, the sun god held nothing back against his enemies, and he certainly did not consider his own people worth any special consideration. Boom! While the two goddesses came to blows far across the starry sky, the battle between the god of meteorology Crius and the god of sun Hyperion raged on. However, unlike Thea's restraint, her husband was never one to go easy. Confronted with his own grandson in actuality, the east wind god Eurus was struck by the god of sun, crossing half the battlefield and flashing past the god of light Ether, before crashing forcibly onto a minor celestial body. The disparity in divine power left Eurus with no chance to turn into an intangible wind to avoid injury, and upon his collision, the very essence of a certain god of stars shattered instantaneously. Accompanied by a scream, a god of stars who stood on the side of the god of sun suddenly burst into light, then gradually faded away, and ultimately turned into a glowing stone. By contrast, the god of the east wind only swayed his somewhat dizzy head, then clambered out from the wreckage of the celestial body. Witnessing this, all the gods of stars on both sides of the battlefield could not help but feel a pang of sorrow, as if mourning for their own kind. This was not the first time such an event occurred. Other true gods at least distinguished between friend and foe, but the god of sun never cared for the existence of the gods of stars. Nevertheless, despite this, the gods of stars dared not leave, for they were bound by the limitations of being territorial gods. They were innate deities and thus immortal, but unlike true gods, they could not continuously draw divine power from their godhood. Once their territory, upon which they depended, was destroyed, they would permanently lose their source of divine power, and the result of drained divine power was an eternal slumber. If no alternative means of acquiring divine power surfaced, this god of stars would likely remain in this state between life and death, never to return. Such was the case with the Heavenly Father. As the Lord of the sky, even after losing his divine king status, the sky continuously supplied him with divine power through his godhood. Yet, to avoid that dreadful transformation, Uranus had no choice but to use every ounce of freshly born divine power to resist that change, and as a consequence, he, too, with his divine power drained, was forced into a deep slumber. Over the past millennia, countless gods of stars had fallen into eternal sleep. Even on the earth below, mountain gods, river gods, lake gods, and others were innumerable in falling into this state indistinguishable from death. Yet no true god cared about this. In their eyes, these quasi-gods without godhood were no different from mortals and nymphs granted with divinity. Mortals could be killed, and eternal slumber was not much different from death for gods. A god who could be killed by merely shattering a celestial body held a status amongst gods akin to the heavenly soldiers and generals from Laine's previous life. Though theoretically immortals as well, they were only referred to as heavenly soldiers and generals, lacking names of their own. Why struggle, my brother? You are no match for me. Have I heard right that you and your child have also fallen out? It seems we truly are fellow sufferers. Ha ha! Amidst his laughter, Hyperion watched the evasive god of meteorology, his body as if poured from gold, charge directly towards the formation formed by the gods of stars. Battles between true gods could easily result in clear victors. But if one side stubbornly delayed the fight, unless the disparity was too great, the struggle could last for years or even decades, which was quite common. Hyperion found it more worthwhile to kill more of his rebellious offspring than to expend energy on Christ. How dare they betray him and side with the divine king against him? It was unforgivable. With that in mind, the god of sun let out a great shout, allowing his voice to echo throughout the starry expanse. Astras, gods of stars, this is the consequence of your indecision. And the two of you, Crius, Rhea, you're not up to it. Send Cronus himself. The humiliation I was once forced to confess under coercion by Laine, the frustration of my wife being detained by Ceus, and having no choice but to face two enemies alone, the fury for being forced to retreat step by step over 1,000 years. All these angers have been unleashed upon my enemies by Hyperion in recent years. With the god of stars took back the sky, he would not be able to do anything about the queen of gods and the powerful god of meteorology. But he swore that when the time came, he would send all the stars that had betrayed him into eternal slumber, one by one. Soon, Hyperion, I truly hope you can still laugh then. Suppressing the rage in his heart, Crius had no intention of stalling for the sake of the god of stars. Everything was coming to an end, and he no longer cared about the fate of those territorial gods. After all, the divine king would have to deal with headaches for a while after the war, as years of divine battles had thrown the energy tides of the stars into chaos. Without these stars, the true gods would have no choice but to intervene and resolve the issues themselves. Boom! The powerful god of meteorology chose to dodge, and the gods of intermediate divine power, the god of daylight and the god of light, also made way in haste. They only wanted to claim a territory in the sky and keep away from their foolish brothers and sisters in the underworld. They weren't truly there to fight to the death for the divine king. Therefore, with no adversary, the god of sun began to wreak havoc among the weaker, true gods and god of stars. The three wind gods turned into currents of air, but they were still torn apart and scattered under the radiance of light and heat. Prometheus, the creator of future bronze humanity, was even used as a weapon to smash one star after another. However, several truly powerful gods turn a blind eye to this. In this unspoken agreement, time slipped away second by second. It was at that moment, as Hyperion was rampantly assaulting, that he suddenly stopped. He turned his head toward the sun. In that direction, he faintly sensed that the seal he had left behind had been touched. It was the seal he had used to imprison his eldest son, Helios. That seal was with the sun, and even the peak of powerful divine power couldn't contend with those shackles. Deities may hold their godhood, but they are not equivalent to the matters represented by their godhood. Even after the primordial gods personified, they were no longer synonymous with their essence, let alone the titans who were born later. Had it novel been at, the power of the sun was far greater than his, as the god of sun, which was well known. Hence, Hyperion had never worried that his eldest son could escape the imprisonment. But just now, reality told him that nothing was impossible. Under the force of a powerful order, the seal was shattered from the inside. The divine king's decree, bolstered by the codex of creation, was nearly as potent as if spoken into existence. The seal that Hyperion left could not withstand the test of time, disintegrating amid a tremor. Cronus, it's you. Incredulous, yet it made sense. Cronus remained restrained, not taking action himself, but his long-prepared divine king's decree did not falter. Apart from Laine, who was in the spirit realm, only two gods in the world had a high affinity for the codex of creation, Themis and the divine king. His authority was greatly enhanced by the natural affinity with order and law, making this divine artifact more terrifying in Cronus's hands than the sickle that had once injured the Heavenly Father. Good, very good. So this is your purpose. Fury turned to laughter. The divine power of Hyperion burst forth, shattering the surrounding celestial bodies. Even though the oppression of the strong over the weak was more pronounced within the same domain, once Helios escaped, he could still disrupt his influence over the sun. It's futile unless you take action yourself. Even with that rebel sun, you're no match for me. Since you dare to do this, then prepare to face my might. The voice of the god of sun echoed through space. That's what he said, and that's what he did. He no longer targeted the god of stars. Hyperion turned to the god of meteorology, intending to teach his brother a lasting lesson and remind him of the pain the sun could bring. Is that so? What about this, then? The faint voice came from afar. It was Queen of Gods Rhea. Unbeknownst to others, she had briefly escaped the Mother of Light by using her special authority, and, as a consequence, the other true gods around her were made targets. However, unlike her husband, the goddess of light Thea did not deliberately strike at those celestial bodies. Instead, she even avoided them. Narrowing his eyes slightly, Hyperion didn't know what trick the other party was playing, but he still looked over. In the palm of the Queen of Gods, a small page shimmered with light. What is that? It looked familiar, but Hyperion couldn't quite place it. Even though he didn't remember what it was, he became cautious. "Ha, nothing, dear brother. That's your old friend." With his chest wound slowly healing under the influence of divine power, Crius finally showed a smile. The divine king had not entrusted him with the most critical task, which was to be expected, but as the god with great divine power, the god of meteorology still knew in advance what it was. Rhea gave Crius a glance, but unlike him, she didn't speak. She simply ignited the page with divine power and then slipped back into a crack in time, turning to face the Mother of Light. Under Hyperion's tense and puzzled gaze, a bad premonition rose in his heart. He remembered the last time he had this feeling was buzz. A noisy sound erupted in his ears, as if millions of lives were playing strange notes beside him. Hyperion's face suddenly changed, and at the corner of his vision, wisps of invisible black mist seeped out of the void. A sense of soul-deep revulsion surged within the god of sun. "Is it that? It's you again, damn monster!" In his shock and anger, Hyperion quickly retreated, but it was of no use. Eclipse was formless and omnipresent. In the blink of an eye, it clung tightly to the god of sun's form, ceaselessly sapping and eroding his divine power. Compared to the last encounter, the intermediate divine power endowed the ancient evil being with even greater strength. Hyperion's power could no longer tear apart its inconstant divine body, only stirring ripples before returning to its original state. "Crius, make your move." Afar, the Queen of Gods spoke calmly. As per Cronus's plans, he could not directly interfere with the Titans, but he could remotely rescue the trapped Helios. The god of sun was to be dealt with by the witless swallower of the sun, while the Queen of Gods and the god of meteorology were responsible for holding off the goddess of light Thea. Although it was just her and Crius, when both light and sun were present in one place, their powers were naturally greatly enhanced. For Rhea, stopping her sister until Hyperion was defeated by his nemesis was the entirety of her mission. After all, the Divine King had not planned to seriously harm Hyperion. He could not condemn the embodiment of the sun itself to the depths of the abyss outside the mortal world. To defeat him, to replace him with another god of sun as he had imprisoned Helios, and then to imprison him beneath the Mount of the Gods or in the underworld using the Divine King's authority. That was the limit of what Cronus could do. At least, that's what the Divine King thought at the moment. Move aside, Buzz. It seemed like a long time passed, but in reality, from the appearance of Eclipse to when the Queen of Gods called for the god of meteorology, only an instant had transpired. The previously complacent Thea suddenly found that the battle had slipped out of control. Once again, the monster that had obscured the sun reappeared in the starry sky. Beams of light formed into ribbons that split into thousands, their substance fluctuating between tangible and intangible as they shot straight towards the two Titan principal gods. Frenzied storms blocked the path of the ribbons, collapsing upon contact, but more storms were continuously pulled from the flow of time, endlessly thwarting Thea's onslaught. Rhea, do you really wish to destroy the sun? You actually dare to let that monster attack it? With an angry shout, Thea found it somewhat incomprehensible. Both she and Rhea were goddesses, and before this, Thea had only suppressed her, having never truly unleashed all her might. Otherwise, despite the Queen of Gods holding a divine artifact, the god of stars surrounding her might not necessarily be much stronger than those on the other side. On one hand, Thea believed she held a winning hand, and on the other, compared to her husband, she still retained some degree of rationality. The gods of stars, by their very nature, were beholden to the ruler of their respective star domains. Once they regained control of the starry skies, wouldn't these stars' gods still be their subordinates? If too many were lost, wouldn't they have to stabilize the starry skies by themselves? But what she never anticipated was that the opposition would release the monster that had consumed the origin of the sun. Destroying the sun in the name of claiming the starry skies would not only fail to increase the Divine King's divine authority, but would also incur the backlash of the world. You worry too much, sister, Rhea replied, shaking her head, her hands never ceasing their motion. She borrowed power from the past, maintaining the god of meteorology's power at its peak. Although not strong in direct combat, Rhea, as the Queen of Gods, was still highly commendable for her supportive capabilities. At it novel been at. You've noticed, haven't you? The power of the Sun Swallower has grown stronger, but is being repelled by the laws of this world. The longer it stays, the more intense the suppression it faces. It cannot remain here forever. Moreover, Cronus has no intention of harming you or your husband. Just let your son and husband switch places. Let him come to the Mount of the Gods as a guest, or perhaps live in the underworld forever, and the god of stars will still revere you as the mother of light. Hyperion imprisoned your eldest son. Do you really bear no grudge against him? Light, in response to the Queen of Gods, came an even more intense fluctuation of divine power. Clearly, Thea had not been swayed by a few words. Hyperion's act of imprisoning her eldest son was indeed something Thea found displeasing, but it was only a minor conflict. After all, the sun god was not the heavenly father, and his actions were not enough to turn his wife's loyalties. Nevertheless, the explanation from the Queen of Gods ultimately reassured her somewhat. As long as there was no problem with the sun, then there was room for negotiation. In an instant, with Thea unleashing her full power, all the deities on the Divine King's side were plunged into darkness. Few remembered that Thea was not only the mother of light, but also the god of eyesight. Under her authority, all enemies lost the ability to see their surroundings with their eyes. Even in the distance, the ancient evil being was affected by this power, but since it did not rely on vision and could still sense light and heat, it remained unimpeded in its actions. Time. With a soft cry, Rhea too activated her own authority. She shared the time that had passed with every true god. Although they could only see the world from a moment ago, it was enough for them to react. Hold her off. It will be over soon. Light and storm collided once more, interwoven with the powers of other true gods. Ether, the god of heavenly light, who had been contributing little until now, also made his full effort, disrupting the goddess of light's control over light. However, as the battle intensified, an ominous premonition suddenly arose in the hearts of the gods present. Thea turned her head to look in the direction Hyperion had evaded to, where he was now tightly enveloped in black mists. The sun god had seen his impending defeat, but his face bore not a hint of dimness. Instead, it was filled with madness. Helios, Cronus, my dear son and brother, since you so desire the starry skies and the sun, then I shall give them to you, he declared. Gazing at the black mist that no effort could dispel, Hyperion ceased to struggle. As the god of the sun should face its own death in a manner befitting its status. You may take what you desire, but the outcome will surely not be as you wish. I shall rule these starry skies, or watch as they turn to scorched earth. The voice of the god of sun resonated through the starry heavens as his gaze rested upon all the deities present. His divine body began to burn, and his divine power became unstable, but the vaguely transmitted sense of oppression grew stronger nonetheless. Not all gods could do this, but the sun undoubtedly could. Thus, accompanying the madness of its master, the immense luminous body that dominated the starry sky began to expand as well. On the Mount of the Gods, the divine king, who had just rescued Helios through spatial separation, had a sudden change in expression. Even Laine, who was spectating from the spirit realm, furrowed his brow. Perhaps because he often dealt with those brain-using gods, even Laine had somewhat forgotten that not all gods of chaos were concerned with gains and losses. Any normal deity would not commit such acts that harm others without benefiting oneself. Especially for the immortal gods, Hyperion's actions would not only affect the present, but also bring continuous negative repercussions in the long years to come. Yet he did it anyway, as if he didn't care about those consequences at all. However, fortunately, this mistake, although Laine was the instigator, was not mainly paid for by him. It was just that for a considerable time in the future, the deities who divided the star domains would all have a headache. The gods of chaos are truly madmen. Even if it wasn't apparent before, one never knows when they might go insane, he said. Recalling the Trojan War that swept through the Olympus pantheon in later times, causing the gods to wage a great war in the mortal realm, simply because a discordant goddess didn't receive an invitation to a banquet, Laine felt there was nothing incomprehensible about this. Now, it was still manageable, but had it been a more aggressive deity, they might have dragged the sun into a collision with the Mount of the Gods. He sighed and waved his hand, summoning Aster, who stood to the side. "Prepare yourself," he said. "If nothing unexpected happens, the area around the sun will be the most heavily damaged. Once you arrive there, you'll have to expend a lot of energy. Choose some from the spiritual bodies of the golden humanity to replace the god of stars. That should be barely manageable." Silently making arrangements, the goddess of starlight took her leave. And in the entire chaos world, there were not a few deities startled by the changes in the starry heavens. At sea, watching the fire meteors streaking across the sky towards the earth, the god of the ocean, Oceanus, also stopped his clash with the primordial sea god, Pontus. The sudden surge in the divine power of the god of sun made them both realize what Hyperion had done. "Let's stop here, Pontus. They have already decided the victor," Oceanus spoke to his uncle. Although if he continued fighting, he could gain more, the circumstances no longer allowed him to do so. From now on, the ocean deity's sovereign planned to steer clear of Cronus's sharp edge until his child was born. And without unexpected events, this time wouldn't be too far off. On the other hand, the primordial sea god, Pontus, also looked up at the sky. Although he had been at a disadvantage all this while, he still had some gains. "Of course I can, but what about you, my nephew? Once Cronus claims victory, you will be his next target," he said. The voice of the primordial sea god was heavy, like the concavity of the earth he originally symbolized. Gaia, who had once conceived 3 gods by herself, was just like this. Uranus symbolized the opposite of the earth, and then the sky came into being. Pontus symbolized the indentations of the earth, and then the ocean was formed. Aurea was the uplift of the earth, which was eventually called the mountains. They were originally part of the earth, which then split this primal matter through the evolution of the world. But you wouldn't really stand by his side, would you? After all, even his own brother was forced by him to dissolve his divine body, said the tall and burly ocean deity sovereign with blue hair cascading over his shoulders, his voice resonating loud and clear. The sea deities present all heard his words. They didn't understand exactly what was happening in the starry sky, but the facts were indeed. The Titans showed no mercy amongst themselves, let alone the primordial sea god who did not belong to the Titans. Perhaps, but I won't oppose him either, Oceanus. The affairs of the Titans should be resolved by you Titan gods yourselves. After all, I have never entertained the idea of that divine king's position. Turning around, the primordial sea god beckoned. He took his retinue of true gods and left the place, returning to his palace established at the bottom of the sea. Across from him, the ocean deity sovereign did not obstruct but continued to observe the anomalies in the sky. The expanding sun, the countless celestial bodies crumbling, the thousands of gods of stars that instantaneously lost their support and fell into eternal slumber, and the rain of stars that streaked across the sky and plummeted to the earth. All these wove together into a beautiful tapestry. But the deities all knew that behind this beauty, something significant must have happened in the starscape of chaos. However, the world had grown too vast nowadays, and apart from a few deities with special authority, there were scarce few beings that could see through heaven and earth at a glance. Hence, they could only silently watch the meteors fall like rain while making various conjectures. Had it novel been at? And in the starscape above, due to Hyperion's actions, 3 principal gods of powerful divine power also unanimously ceased their motions. Hyperion, have you gone mad? Although the god of meteorology didn't quite regard the god of stars, he still found it somewhat incomprehensible. The raging sun instantly turned its surrounding celestial bodies to dust, and those farther away shattered into pieces, plummeting into the mortal realm. Crius could understand if this was to counter an enemy, but what Hyperion was actually destroying were his own gods of stars. After all, those who resided around the sun were beings who could never pledge allegiance to the divine king no matter what. Isn't it obvious? The divine power was still burning, and even eclipses, who roamed around the god of sun, felt somewhat overfed and distanced himself from Hyperion. This somewhat disheveled ancient Titan god sneered as he looked toward the distance, in the direction where Helios had fled. Alas, but not to you. If not for the birth of this rebel, as the sole ruler of the sun, even Cronus couldn't defeat me in the starscape. I know what he wants, and I know my eldest son is waiting to inherit my legacy, but I won't give him that chance. A star domain that has lost 30% of its gods of stars, a supreme celestial body that is berserk and unruly. That's the gift I'm leaving for him. And besides, Cronus is different from me. I would only imprison him, but the divine king only needs a son without the power to resist, under his control. Having said that, Hyperion gave one last glance at the surrounding black mist. He did not look at his wife, for he could guess her disappointed expression. He simply mustered his strength, and with a loud boom, exploded his divine body. As the god of the sun, Cronus dared not confine him to the abyss. But if he were sealed elsewhere, Hyperion would truly have no chance of turning the tables. So he took advantage of the interval when the ancient evil being devoured his shattered remains, transforming into a golden light and rushing towards the sun. At the same time, the sun in a frenzy also sped straight toward its master, shattering countless celestial bodies along the way. In the distance, the queen of gods reached out her hand as if to block, but the goddess of light, Thea, held her back. Although she did not understand her husband's actions, Thea did not wish for Hyperion to be confined to Mount of the Gods. In the end, in her heart, the god of stars was merely a useful tool. Whoosh! Thus, before the eyes of the gods, the golden light entered the sun. Yet even though he returned to the symbol of his godhood, this act of self-destruction was much harder to recover from than normal injuries. Unless something unexpected happened, Hyperion would be unable to do anything for at least 1,000 years. Following the return of the god of the sun, the supreme celestial body not only failed to calm down, but grew even more violent. Not far away, Helios, who had just escaped confinement, hurried over. He viewed the turbulent sun and tried to use his portion of the godhood to calm it, but all was in vain. "Let me do it," said a voice as space warped into a tunnel, with Cronus's voice emerging from it. His goal had been achieved, but what was left was a mess. The divine king didn't know whether he should be pleased or not.